Chapter 130. Grim was woken up by a loud commotion. Outside the cave, there was a huge commotion. Even the lava python that was in charge of guarding the cave had stretched out half of its body and was attacking something fiercely, using its thick tail to block the entrance of the cave. When Grim packed up and walked out of the cave, the battle outside was already coming to an end. In the cave that wasn't that big, there were 7 lava hounds' broken bodies lying on the ground. Scarlet, half-melted lava flowed all over the ground. To these lava hounds, the rocks were their bodies, and the molten lava was their blood. Now that so much blood had flowed out, the chances of them surviving were very slim. Where did so many lava hounds come from? Could it be that the small, fiery lava cave that he occupied was their lair? A series of questions floated in Grim's mind, but he quickly rejected them all. When choosing a place to rest the day before, Grim had put in a lot of thought and avoided most of the areas where the flame creatures were active. Under such circumstances, how could they be attacked by a pack of lava hounds? Moreover, he had set the lava python to defend and counterattack. It would only retaliate when it was attacked. This meant that these lava hounds were the ones who initiated the attack. The more he thought about it, the more Grim frowned. He had a feeling that this was not a coincidence, but, as expected, with the AI chip's quick search, Grim found out that the molten core giant had the ability to summon flame creatures. Just as he made up his mind, a cacophony of barking came from the lava passageways. From the sounds, there were a large number of lava hounds rushing towards this place. Damn it, the enemy is here. He just did not know if the molten core giants were here. Grim did not have time to think too much. He turned around and jumped into the lava python's wide, open mouth, urging it to quickly enter the tunnel that led to the top of the volcano. No matter where the enemy came from, it was better to stay as far away from the lava sea that the molten core giants regarded as their home. The lava python swayed its thick body and forced its way into a narrow tunnel. The stone scales on its body scraped against the walls, causing sparks to fly and gravel to fly. Just as its entire body entered the tunnel, the remaining tail of the rock python lashed out with great force. In an instant, the entrance of the lava tunnel collapsed, and the falling rocks and gravel quickly sealed up the entrance. At this moment, more than 10 lava hounds pounced out from the nearby tunnels and were blocked by the tumbling rocks. The hot-tempered lava hound immediately growled loudly. It dug a path with all its might while warning its master in the distance. A moment later, 1 big and 2 small molten core giants arrived at the scene with heavy steps. It couldn't be helped. Their bodies were too large, and ordinary small lava passageways couldn't squeeze through. Most of the time, they could only walk in the large tunnels eroded by the underground lava. As for the enemies hiding in the narrow areas, they could only force them out with the help of the flaming creatures. Seeing the collapsed passage in front of them, they instantly understood. Under the command of the adult molten core giant, Alec, the remaining dozen or so lava hounds gave up on the idea of digging a path forward. They turned around and pounced into the nearby lava passageways that were still relatively intact, preparing to intercept the enemy through a roundabout route. Alec turned around and ordered the 2 little fellows. There's only one enemy, and it's a human apprentice. It's not dangerous. Go tell a lug that there's no need to mobilize so many people. I'll go after it myself. After saying that, it turned around and walked towards the passage that was already tightly blocked. As it strode forward, its body spewed out a terrifyingly hot stream of flames. In front of it, the rocks that were originally as hard as boulders began to soften and melt in an instant. Then, they turned into flowing magma. Almost without any hindrance, Alec's fire eroded a human-shaped path, allowing him to continue striding forward. Behind it, it left behind a path of lava that no one could stand on. But at this moment, Grim had already fled 5 kilometers away. However, in this twisted and winding underground world, it was said that he had run 5 miles, but in a straight line, it was probably only 400 to 500 meters. Moreover, the density of the fire element in the rock stratum was extremely high. If the rock python wanted to travel through the underground like it did in the dark crypt, it would need to consume an astonishing amount of earth element energy. So, unless it was a critical moment, Grimm was not willing to use up the energy of the rock python. The pursuit only lasted for half an hour, and the molten core giant gave up on its own. It seemed that there was a clear end line in their hearts. Once the enemy escaped from this range, they would no longer take the risk to go out and chase. Sensing the strong source of fire behind him gradually getting further away, Grimm let out a long sigh of relief. He dared to say that it must be an adult, wizard-level molten core giant. Once he encountered such a big fellow, even if he sent out the entire demon puppet squad, he would only end up with a miserable ending. He lacked an earth element giant that could fight it head-on, and he also lacked an elemental puppet that could fight freely in the volcanic environment. It seemed that his demon puppet squad was still far from being an army. Also, it could be seen that the molten core giants were very protective of the little ones in their tribe. The two quasi-wizard level creatures that Grimm sensed from afar did not participate in the pursuit, and they rarely acted alone. This undoubtedly increased the difficulty of capturing them. After all, with Grimm's current strength, he did not even dare to think about catching an adult wizard-level molten core giant. Only these quasi-wizard-level creatures had a chance. After being chased out of the core area of the lava sea, Grimm could only wander around the upper zone, waiting for his body to slowly recover while exploring a new path to the lava sea. After all, this huge volcano had been eroded by the underground lava for many years, forming thousands of dense, cobweb-like lava tunnels. Almost every tunnel led to the mysterious lava world. Therefore, it was almost impossible for the molten core giants to block outsiders from approaching. When his body had just recovered to its best condition, Grimm sneaked into the lava sea again. This time, he soaked in the lava for twice as long as the last time, and the progress he made was even more gratifying. The transformation of the body of flame had increased from 23% to 37%. Grimm's body was once again ravaged by the soft feet. 1/7 of the flesh in his body had been reduced, but the increase in his vitality allowed him to quickly regrow new flesh. His body was like a factory that was repeatedly demolished and rebuilt. Every time his flesh was regenerated, the delicate balance built up would be broken by the strengthening of his fire element innate talent. Then, everything would be pushed down again, and new organs and flesh would slowly regenerate to match the new body of flame. And in this constant repetition, the changes that were compatible with his flame baptism physique were preserved, while the temporary and unsuitable changes were rearranged in new combinations. Originally, Grimm wanted to let the AI chip intervene in the body reconstruction, but after a small experiment, he had no choice but to give up. Due to the AI chip's personal vision and structure, it was impossible for it to provide a suitable space for future strengthening of his fire element innate talent. However, his body's instincts could unimaginably do this in the hazy and chaotic environment. Many of the minor organ changes that his body made under the guidance of his instincts had originally been judged as useless and redundant by the AI chip. However, after 2 or 3 rounds of body transformation, Grimm was surprised to find that the parts that were judged as useless and redundant had seamlessly become the cornerstone of his new changes. Grimm would not have been surprised if such a discovery was just an occasional occurrence. However, with the AI chip's comprehensive monitoring of his body, this discovery became a spark that set the prairie ablaze. Similar examples could be found in almost every part of his body. At this point, Grimm had no choice but to give up on the AI chip's random interference and let his body drive everything. The AI chip retreated to the role of a comprehensive monitor, recording the entire process of transformation with precise and detailed data. The more he saw and thought about it, the more he understood the term worlds that was always mentioned by wizards. The world that Grimm was currently in was only a large plane in the vast multiverse. Such a vast and boundless world with abundant resources was just a grain of sand in the depths of the vast sea of stars. If Earth and the Earth's universe in his previous life was a low magic world, Then the Magus plane and multiverse in this life was a high magic world. Endless tides of energy filled every part of the void in this world. Under the influence of such an abundant tide of energy, mysticism itself had become a terrifying power. In any world, any plane, any person could unleash a terrifying power that far exceeded their own abilities. All of this could be categorized under the powerful domain of mysticism. In his previous life on Earth, if someone were to say that Earth could also develop its own consciousness and have its own will, it would be a joke that would make people laugh their heads off. Because Earth's mass was too large, the matter and energy it contained were far from enough to support the birth of its own will. Hence, in a low magic world, it was almost impossible for a planet to have its own consciousness. But Grimm was currently in a high magic world. The mighty tides of energy were everywhere, almost filling every inch of space here. This also provided a solid foundation for the birth of a planet's own consciousness. Of course, in the multiverse, there were no planets, only planes. The floating continents that were wrapped up in the barriers of the planes were constantly immersed in endless energy. They used their vast bodies to carry countless soil, sand, trees, forests, mountains, seas, lakes, metals, and even tens of thousands of beings of various races. Whether it was a normal rock or a top-notch magus who stood at the peak of the world, they were all part of this plane. Chapter 131. With the vastness of a plane, the plane's consciousness could never be as agile and responsive as a human's brain. However, its basic likes and dislikes were no different from humans. All the individuals living in its embrace, whether they were sentient beings or unsentient rocks and wood, were insignificant parts of the plane's consciousness. If the plane was completely sealed off and the total amount of resources and living beings remained the same, the plane's consciousness would lose the opportunity to evolve and grow stronger. Only by working hard to protect what it had and continuously usurping resources from the outside world for its own growth could the plane's consciousness continue to grow stronger and awaken itself into a more powerful existence. As a large plane, the Sorcerer Continent had long since sprouted a great consciousness that belonged to this plane, thus forming a world's consciousness that matched the Sorcerer Continent's. After the birth of this consciousness, the only way it could control this plane was through the invisible hand of law. All matter and living beings that lived in this plane were bound by numerous nomological powers. What could make fire? Fire could smelt metal, and metal could cut down trees and stones. The earth could bear everything, giving birth to life in the soil, and water could nourish everything. These were all superficial phenomena. Behind the scenes, everything was controlled by the all-encompassing and all-encompassing plane's laws. Even the top-level sorcerers who claimed to have conquered planes and were as powerful as gods could not ignore the existence of the plane's laws and act recklessly. Therefore, the more powerful a sorcerer was, the more profound their understanding of the worlds would be. As for the weaker beings, they could only sense all of this in a hazy and illusory manner. Just like the evolution of Grimm's body of flame, the existence of the plane's consciousness was everywhere. There was no god or god here, but there was a selfless plane's consciousness hidden in the depths of the plane, silently driving the plane's orderly operation. All actions that were beneficial to the plane's operation would receive hazy feedback from the plane's consciousness, thus increasing one's control and authority over the plane's laws. As for actions that went against the plane's consciousness, it would also cause it to feel disgusted, thus becoming the object of disgust for all beings in the plane. Through monitoring and analyzing the data of his body, Grimm vaguely sensed that there was an invisible hand controlling everything in the plane. Otherwise, it would be underestimating Grimm's intelligence to say that this was an instinctive and unconscious action of the body. In order for a sorcerer apprentice to become an official sorcerer, it seemed that they had to cross the threshold of understanding the laws of the plane. Otherwise, why would there be such a huge difference between a prospective wizard with 20 points of mental strength and a wizard with 21 points of mental strength? With a mind full of questions, Grimm waited until the immersion of the body of flame ended before quickly leaving the lava sea to avoid being caught by the patrolling molten core giants. Grimm ran out of the safe zone in one breath and found a new campsite to settle down. During this period of consumption, the food and water he brought were almost all used up, so Grimm had no choice but to live a primitive life of eating raw meat and drinking blood. Their food came from the fire lizards they hunted, and their water came from the water and lizard blood that they gathered using witchcraft. In order to arrange the best time for his immersion, Grimm would change his campsite every 2 days. The time and location he entered and exited the lava sea was also different. Using this method, he successfully avoided the molten core giants' traps and ambushes, which made the molten core giants angry but helpless. Through countless conversations with the molten core giants, Grimm quickly figured out the molten core giants' way of thinking and action. After countless tests and summaries, he finally broke through the blockade of the molten core giants and successfully approached their nest, the Circular Islands. Although it was called a circular island, it was actually just a bunch of huge rocks floating on the lava sea. The molten core giants used thick alloy chains to tie them together, forming a chain of floating islands anchored in the center of the lava sea. The lair of the molten core giants was located on these floating islands. It could be said that a molten core giant's entire life was spent in this vast lava sea from birth to death. This was why they only had the strength of a wizard and high intelligence, but they did not have the corresponding high-level wisdom. To sum it up, they were very smart, but not at the level of cunning. That was why they were so powerful, but they were still disturbed by Grimm, a high-level acolyte. Of course, it was rare to see a high-rank apprentice like Grimm. After observing the molten core giants' floating islands, Grimm did not give up. He even thought of robbing the molten core giant family's treasure vault. These molten core giants were born and raised in this place. They patrolled in the lava sea every day. Almost all the high-level magic gems and top-grade witchcraft materials that could be produced by the underground volcanoes had been piled up like a mountain in their treasury. If he could successfully rob such a family's treasure vault, Grimm felt that he would not have to spend the next few hundred years searching for resources. Just this one time was enough for him to eat his fill. But after carefully inspecting it a few times, Grimm was discouraged once again. The molten core giants really valued their treasure vault. Not only did they build it on the largest floating island, but they also built it next to the Elder's residence. There were also 2 elite molten core giants guarding the entrance all year round, so the defense was impenetrable. Grimm had the AI chip come up with countless plans, but he still could not find a reliable way to sneak into the treasure vault under the watchful eyes of the 2 elite molten core giants. However, after searching for treasures, but to no avail, Grimm accidentally made another discovery. He found the molten core giants' cemetery of death. Although the molten core giants held a lifespan of 1,000 to 2,000 years, as time passed, they would inevitably die. In order to give their dead tribesmen a place to rest in peace, the molten core giants built a cemetery on one of the floating islands. Every time a tribesman was about to die, they would enter the cemetery and wait for their death. After they died, their huge and scorching bodies would gradually cool down and then solidify into stone statues that stood quietly. Hence, there were many stone statues in the cemetery, and there were even some bodies that were as tall as 7 to 8 meters. The molten core giants guarded their family's treasure vault strictly to prevent human magi or other fire creatures from sneaking in and stealing their treasures. However, Grimm did not find any effective security measures for the family graveyard. This was actually understandable. After all, not everyone or any creature would have any improper thoughts about a lifeless stone statue. However, when the molten core giants encountered Grimm, who could even squeeze oil out of stone, their family's graveyard became precarious. What Grimm was after was the elemental cores left in the remains of the giants. The elemental crystal cores that have been dead for too long would, of course, have lost all their soul aura and could not be used further. However, for the elemental crystal cores that had been dead for less than 100 years, he might be able to find some cores that could be used to make magic puppets. One had to know that the molten core giants that could enter the family cemetery were the most senior ones, and even the weakest elemental crystal cores were at the Magus level. If he was lucky, he might even be able to find a grade 2 Magus level crystal core. At the thought of elemental magic puppets of this level, Grimm's heart palpitated, and he could not control himself. He could not wait to rush to the ring-shaped floating island, smash all the giant bodies, and collect all the crystal cores. Unfortunately, this was just pure fantasy. If he really did that, he would definitely be able to get on the island, but not get off. The molten core giants would definitely eat him alive. There were about 200 molten core giants living on the island. Among them, about 70 were baby quasi-magi, and more than 140 were mature magi. In this world where they had no natural enemies and did not have to worry about food and clothing, their defense mechanism was not very strong. If it wasn't for the fact that Grimm's level was too low, these clumsy giants with huge bodies and great strength would definitely be his best prey. But now, even a young molten core giant would require a lot of effort for him to take it down. Therefore, if he wanted to take advantage of the situation, the only way was to fish in troubled waters. With this preliminary plan in mind, he did not rush to provoke the molten core giants. Instead, he became even quieter. Every day, he would only roam around the outskirts of the fire world and only sneak to the edge of the lava sea every few days to take a bath before sneaking away. Using this regular movement pattern, Grimm successfully deceived the patrolling molten core giants. They gradually let down their guard and no longer saw him as an enemy that could pose a threat to them. Although the hunt for Grimm was still ongoing, it was more like a routine activity, a game of cat and mouse that would be carried out almost every day or two. Of course, Grimm was not in a hurry. This underground mission would last for as long as 3 months, and it would take a long time for his physique of flame to evolve. Therefore, what he needed to do now was to wait for the day that his physique of flame broke through. When that day came, it would be the moment he put his plan into action. Finally, 2 months after Grimm entered the fire world, his long-awaited physique of flame finally broke through. When the AI chip's projection of the physique of flame's progress jumped from 99% to 100%, Grimm felt that his entire body had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. Everything was different from before. Body of Flame. Chapter 132. There was a huge difference between Body of Flame and Body of Flame. If Grimm's Body of Flame was considered a body of flesh and blood before, then now that he had transformed into a body of flame, he was truly immune to fire. Even without the buff from the Flame Lord's scepter, he could still bathe in the sea of lava as he pleased. He no longer had to worry about being hurt by the high temperature. After all, the so-called fire immunity buff only protected him from low-level fire damage. Once the elemental flames exceeded a certain limit, he would still have to endure a certain amount of fire damage. Previously, when he had strengthened his body of flame, his body had been constantly damaged by the fierce fire energy. This was mainly because the intensity of the fire energy had exceeded the limit of his fire immunity. Now that he had transformed his body into a body of flame, he could elementalize a part of his body at any time and become immune to all fire damage. In the future, even a Tier 2 wizard would not be able to harm him with an elemental fireball. However, this immunity was only limited to fire spells. If he encountered a variant fire spell, he would not be able to avoid taking damage. For example, the lava fireball was a combination of fire and physical damage. Grimm might be immune to fire damage, but he could not be immune to physical damage. This variant fire spell made up more than half of all spells. It was used by wizards to prevent their elemental attacks from being countered by their enemies. For example, if Grimm had gone too deep into the lava, he might have been injured by the flames. Now that he had a body of flame, any area where fire elemental particles gathered would become his home ground. Even the hottest elemental flames could not harm him. Instead, they would become his greatest benefits. At least in the lava, the molten core giant's geographical advantage had been taken care of. Previously, Grimm's control over elemental flames was considered a high-level spell technique. Now, controlling elemental flames had become a natural instinct for him. From now on, Grimm would no longer need to run around in the sea of flames. He was the fire, and the fire was him. The elemental flames, under his control, would no longer harm his clothes. Apart from this, the greatest benefit of having a body of flame was that he could specialize in fire. The power of all fire spells would be doubled, the duration of casting would be halved, and the consumption of mental strength would be halved. In any area with an abundance of fire element, his spiritual energy recovery speed would be doubled, and his body of flame would automatically repair his injuries. However, there were gains and losses. The body of fire wasn't always good. At the very least, when Grimm was attacked by water or ice element attacks, the damage would be doubled. In an area with an abundance of water elements, his self-healing and spiritual energy recovery would be inhibited. Grimm was already aware of this, so he was not surprised. Right now, he was more concerned about the state of his strength. After a careful scan by the AI chip, the latest statistics of his strength were projected. Name, Grimm race, human, semi-elemental, attributes. 9, 24 power, +1, 7. 87 agility, +1. 20 constitution, spiritual power profession. Sorcerer apprentice, quasi-sorcerer. Health points, healthy, class EXP class skills. Scroll copying, spell reading, puppet making, intermediate. Fire mastery personal skills. Body of flame, passive. Flaming hand, flame arrow, flame spear, flame shield, flame reflection, close combat passive. High temperature, field magic equipment. Flaming Lord Scepter, storage belt, secret voodoo scroll, boots of speed, agility +1. Talisman of brute force, vitality, strength +1. Dispel wand, healing wand, prophecy wand, green fairy, curse resistance +5. Screaming twig. Looking at the AI chip statistics, Grimm's steady heart could not help but be excited. He had finally become a quasi-sorcerer. From now on, he was no longer a rookie acolyte who could be killed by anyone. Unfortunately, ever since his spiritual force had jumped from 16 to 20 points, the +1 noble headband and +2 Einstone had lost their effects. His spiritual force had already reached the upper limit of 20 points for acolytes. If he wanted to increase it further, he would need to comprehend the power of the law and undergo a necessary advancement ceremony. However, this was all in the future. Now that he had become a quasi-sorcerer, the plan he had been planning for a long time could finally be implemented. After obtaining the body of flame, the aura of a human on his body became fainter. As long as he disguised himself carefully with the harsh and cruel environment of the lava sea, it would be extremely difficult for the molten core giants to find him again. Grimm returned to the shore and used his magic equipment to equip himself. Then, he dived into the lava sea and disappeared. Elder Nimr had been feeling uneasy for the past few days. As the chieftain of the remaining molten core giants, he had to use his intelligence and life to protect and continue the existence of the molten core giants. This world did not belong to them. Although the molten core giants had strong bodies and individual strength, they were a special race that could not leave the volcano world and live independently. They could only defend their own world and avoid the invasion of outsiders. This world belonged to the human magi. This was something that was known from the moment the first molten core giant was born in the depths of the Earth's core. The reason why the human magi could tolerate the existence of a foreign race like them was to enslave and plunder them. The volcano world belonged to them, and they belonged to the Ubayer family. With a magic contract from 1,000 years ago, the great molten core giant tribe became an alternative miner for the local human magi family. Every 5 years, they had to submit a long list of resources. The number of resources was enough to give the children of the flame sea a headache. As a proud and tyrannical race, it was not that they had never tried to resist, but the power of the human magi was not something they could resist. People who had never experienced the power of a grade 3 magus could not understand how terrifying it was. The most direct consequence of that riot to the molten core giants tribe was the loss of 1/3 of their population. It took them 300 to 400 years to recuperate from such a huge injury. Before the rebellion, although the human magi oppressed them harshly, they would not step into their territory. However, in the past few hundred years, the magi family, called Ubayer, became more and more outrageous. They often sent some magi apprentices down to train during the temporary rest period of the volcano. For the human apprentices, it might be a life experience, but for the molten core giants, it was like slaughtering their servant beasts. Sometimes, they would even gang up on a molten core giant that was left alone, which made the molten core giants even angrier. However, Elder Nemur negotiated with the grade 3 magus of the Ubayer family several times and was warned not to harm the Ubayer family's apprentices. As for the foreign apprentices, they were not included. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the molten core giants, it was impossible to recognize the human apprentices. Therefore, they could only form patrol teams and guard their territory, not allowing any human apprentices to get close to their habitat. Fortunately, the human apprentices who came for the trial were limited in strength. In addition, the molten core giants consciously dispersed the fire creatures to the periphery, so there were not many situations where they could break into the lava sea and disturb their lives. However, the situation this year was obviously different from the past. This time, there was a mysterious guy among the human apprentices. He broke into the edge of the lava sea 5 times and seemed to be studying some unknown witchcraft. As this guy was extremely cunning and strange, it was difficult to stop him even if 2 or 3 patrol teams were sent. Therefore, Nemur could only order the giants to be more vigilant. The little guy in the tribe was not allowed to leave their residence alone. In order to prevent outsiders from coveting the gems and materials collected, Nemur even sent 2 more powerful warriors to guard the family's treasury. But even so, when he was comfortably soaking in the fire pool, a chill flashed through his heart from time to time, as if he had missed something very important. Nemur was a large molten core giant that was 7 meters tall. He was also the oldest person in the tribe, having lived for 15 years, and his strength had reached the peak of the molten core giants. If converted to human magi, he would at least have the strength of a grade 2 magus. However, as a special race that relied on its strong body and talent to fight, the number of powerful fire abilities it could master was less than 10. And human magi of the same rank would easily have close to 100 powerful witchcraft to choose from. Without the human magi's deep accumulation of knowledge that lasted for nearly 10,000 years, without the human magi's endless strange equipment, without the human magi's huge number that could come at a moment's notice, the molten core giants would never be able to escape the fate of being enslaved and ordered around by human magi. With Nemur's strength, as long as the terrifying grade 3 magus of the Ubayer family did not come personally, he would not fear any opponent of the same rank in the lava sea. But these days he still felt a chill in his heart from time to time, as if something bad was about to befall their tribe. Therefore, he could not eat or sleep in peace these days. Every day, he constantly urged his tribe to patrol the area, regularly patrolling the entire island, causing everyone to be dispirited. But what made him feel rather gratified was that after going through such hardships, the volcano's 3-month temporary rest period was finally coming to an end. Sensing the rumbling thunder in the depths of the Earth's core that was getting louder and louder, he felt a little more relieved. But it was at times like this that he felt more afraid. Chapter 133. The furthest point of the inner sea enclosed by the ring-shaped floating islands was 5 kilometers away. Nemur stood on the edge of the island and could barely see the outline of the floating islands opposite him. As he scanned the floating islands one by one, he could see the figures of his clansmen busying themselves everywhere. And even more of the clan's little fellows were soaking in the magma of the inner sea, happily chasing each other. Although it was a little noisy, it also made the clan appear more lively. Just as he closed his eyes to sense the direction of danger, An unprecedented explosion suddenly occurred at the edge of the lava sea in the southeast corner of the ring-shaped floating islands. The rock walls within 100 meters were torn apart, and countless pieces of rubble and rock fell into the lava sea like raindrops, creating a huge column of smoke and fire. Nimr ran with large strides, the floating islands flitting past under his feet. In less than a quarter of an hour, he arrived at the floating island closest to the site of the accident. Standing at the edge of the floating island, half of its body was submerged in the boiling red magma. Its huge stone hand, the size of a carriage, scooped up a large amount of magma and poured it on its body. As a series of mysterious and obscure syllables were completed, a huge flaming eye appeared in front of it. "Great Spirit of Fire, please let me see what happened there." Nimr used his deep and hoarse voice to make a request. With the support of powerful fire elemental energy, the eye of flame trembled, and the scene dozens of kilometers away was quickly projected. "These damned outsiders. It must be them who are destroying our homeland and tarnishing our sacred sea. Elder, let's chase them out now." Nearly 100 powerful giant warriors saw this scene and roared angrily. After calling out to each other, they boarded a crude lava warship and quickly headed for the area where the accident happened. Elder Nimr controlled the Eye of Flame and constantly scanned the area in the distance for any movement. Although there was an earth-shattering commotion there, he did not find any signs of outsiders. This undoubtedly made Elder Nimr even more worried. What were these outsiders trying to do? Were they just simply causing some destruction? Based on Nimr's understanding of those human magi, everything they did was targeted. They would rarely cause meaningless destruction just to vent their anger. If their goal wasn't to destroy the lava ocean, then Elder Nimr shuddered inwardly as he turned around and roared at the remaining clansmen, "Immediately impose martial law on the entire island. All the adult giants, move out and..." Before it could finish its words, a huge pillar of smoke suddenly rose from an island in the northwest corner of the ring-shaped floating island, as if some huge guy was rolling around on it. And that place was the cemetery of death of their tribe. Damn it, these abominable humans who should have been devoured by the fire spirit actually came to the place where the ancestors were sleeping to cause trouble. Quick, quick, everyone go there. Hearing the elders roar, all the remaining molten core giants strode towards the ring-shaped floating island. Some of the giants who had the ability to teleport with fire paused for a moment before disappearing in a burst of flames that soared into the sky. A moment later, 200 to 300 meters away, the giant's body appeared in the same pillar of fire that shot into the sky. After pausing for 4 to 5 seconds, when the fire elements around its body were under its control again, the giant once again used flame teleportation and rushed another 300 meters forward. Although the molten core giants had a strong body and physique, agility was not their forte. The speed of the giants with flame teleportation was quite impressive. Every time their huge bodies appeared, they were one step closer to the floating island. On the other hand, the ordinary giants could only cross islands and houses as they came across them, running with large strides in a chaotic manner. At this moment, Grimm's eyes were shining as he plundered the great spoils of war that he had never dared to dream of in the past. This was an irregular floating island that covered an area of several hundred acres. The edge of the floating island was filled with jagged rock peaks and stone pillars. In the open space of the island, there were 30 to 40 molten core giants that had completely solidified into stone statues. According to Grimm's original plan, of course, it was to sneak into the village without any gunmen. Unfortunately, it was a good plan, but when he swam across the sea and snuck into the giant's graveyard, he found that it was too difficult to harvest everything here without making a sound. These molten core giants were famous for their hard and dense bodies when they were alive. When they died, all the fire elements in their bodies dissipated, and the core of their consciousness was firmly solidified in the stone statues by the terrifyingly thick rock armor. Moreover, these rocks were the sturdiest steel rock or granite in the underground world, and they were mixed with unimaginably sturdy black iron, fine gold, and thorium. Not only did this rock armor have a terrifying physical defense, but it also had excellent magic resistance. Therefore, after Grimm snuck onto the island, he could not pry open a single stone statue even after breaking 3 enchanted swords. Seeing that there were treasures all over the place in front of him, but he could not eat them, Grimm almost went crazy. Moreover, the real world did not allow him to spend a lot of time to slowly wear down the hard shells of the giants. Once the giants who were out heard the news and rushed back, a mere fire element quasi-wizard like him would probably be skinned alive by more than 300 giants. Left with no choice, Grimm could only summon 6 rock pythons in one go and let them use their barbaric courage to stage an earth-shattering smashing and looting in the giants' graveyard. The 6 rock pythons used all their means, either using their hard bodies to crazily smash or wrapping themselves around a stone statue and smashing it with all their might. In short, they were as violent and crazy as they could be. The huge cloud of dust that Elder Nemur saw just now was the result of the crazed violence of the rock pythons. While commanding the rock serpents to destroy the remains of the giant statue, Grimm nervously observed the surroundings of the floating island. As this was a family graveyard, there were very few people living on the nearby floating islands. The huge explosion had also attracted many giants to the other side of the floating island, so it was relatively safe here for the time being. However, as the floating island became chaotic, the silhouettes of many giants appeared on the ring-shaped island chain in the distance. What was even more terrifying was that there were more than 10 molten core giants that were more than 5 meters tall, riding on rising flames as they rapidly approached. The leader was a huge molten core giant that was more than 7 meters tall. The powerful fire and earth elemental energy within its body was so strong that it was blinding. Damn it. This must be a rank 2 molten core giant. Grimm estimated the enemy's speed while anxiously urging his rock pythons to hurry up and work. One had to know that those who could enter the giant's graveyard were powerful magi at the very least. Even rank 2 magi were not few. In such a treasure trove, even one more second and one more grab would be a great opportunity for him to rise in the future. While observing the encirclement of the enemies, Grimm frantically smashed and smashed. His heart was in his throat, and even with his physique, his palms and back were covered in cold sweat. Asterisk beep. Asterisk hearing the warning from the AI chip in his mind, Grimm no longer hesitated. He jumped into the mouth of a rock python and led his demolition team into the sea of lava, escaping in different directions. Of course, the rock python that Grimm was riding on was the only one that had loot. As soon as it entered the sea of lava, it desperately sank into the semi-molten magma, swaying all the way to the nearest escape route. Meanwhile, the other 5 rock pythons slithered across the surface of the sea of lava, fleeing in another direction with great momentum. The world of flames that had been calm and tranquil just a moment ago had turned into a raging sea of lava the next moment. They hid in the giant's graveyard, and the molten core giants did not dare to use their violent long-range abilities to attack them. They were afraid of destroying this sacred place. Once they left, the giants did not hold back anymore. They quickly approached them while madly attacking them with long-range fire abilities. Flaming Storm, Lava Core Explosion, Meteor Descent, Earth Fire Pulse. A series of powerful fire abilities stirred the sea of lava into a raging sea of fire. The violent energy explosion swept across the entire world. An elemental storm that could be seen with the naked eye rapidly expanded along the sea surface, and soon all the escaping rock pythons were caught in it. Although the rock pythons were large in size, their strength and physique were considered top-notch among the elemental monsters. However, when faced with such a tyrannical and saturated attack, their bodies that were made of rock still melted like hot wax. 2 of the rock pythons were broken in half and were swept up by the elemental storm. Their broken bodies flew high above the sea of flames. In the next moment, even more violent abilities engulfed them. Although the remaining 3 rock pythons were badly damaged, they still stubbornly tried to escape to the periphery of the storm. However, before they could escape, a series of explosions rang out, and tall and mighty molten core giants appeared beside them. They raised their millstone-like fists and bombarded their bodies. Grimm's heart beat violently as he sensed the consciousness nodes behind him extinguishing one by one. Half of the plan was completed, and the only thing left was to escape. Grimm's existence was not noticed by the giants at first, but as the rock pythons were destroyed one by one, the powerful elder Nemur finally discovered the rock python that was hiding in the lava sea with his flame sense. However, by this time, Grimm had already escaped 7 miles away. The tragic state of the family graveyard had completely enraged the molten core giants. They either rode on lava warships or swam in the sea of lava, desperately chasing after Grimm. Moreover, each of the giants summoned a large number of flame creatures, forming a large army of flame. They swore to capture the despicable human. Unfortunately, their disadvantage in speed made them extremely angry, but there was nothing they could do. The human thief who had plundered their family graveyard had successfully escaped from the sea of lava and was rushing towards the periphery of the Fire Mountain world. The furious giants no longer cared about the agreement they had signed with the human magi. They drove the rolling lava into the lava passage and followed the human thief all the way to the top of the volcano. Along the way, there were many human acolytes who had come to train, and they were working hard to find magic gems and underground resources that had been washed to the top by the lava. Thus, they who were caught off guard immediately suffered a great loss. Chapter 134. No one knew what had happened in the depths of the volcano. However, the completely berserk volcano world was no longer suitable for exploration and treasure hunting. This was something that everyone could see. Therefore, Grimm mixed in with the resentful foreign apprentices. After completing his mission, he secretly left Pamela Town. When Grimm successfully returned to the magic swamp as a quasi-wizard, the whole tower was shocked. Once upon a time, Grimm's name was so unknown among the wizard apprentices that many people did not even know of his existence. But now, with his strong rise, some of the powerful people that they could only look up to in the past were now left behind. They became the most dejected group of people. While some people were still doubting the authenticity of this news, Wizard Kogan, who represented the Salubo family, once again came to the Swamp Tower and summoned Grimm to the 5th floor. Unsurprisingly, Grimm's choice was the same as Mary's. They both chose to serve the Salubo family for 10 years in exchange for the necessary resources to advance. Of course, if Grimm was confident that he could get all the resources he needed to advance to an official wizard, he could leave the Salubo family and choose to become a drifter. However, with the current development of the Scattered Tower Forest, wandering wizards and apprentices without a family were generally oppressed. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to smoothly pass his apprenticeship, he would inevitably have to join a wizard family. As for the Byron family badge that Grimm obtained in the dark underground cave, it only meant that the Byron family was willing to protect him in the Dagon area. He did not sign a formal contract to join the Byron family. After seeing Wizard Kogan, as soon as Grimm returned, he was caught by Mary and brought back to her residence. Tell me, what did you do during your mission? How did you suddenly advance to a quasi-wizard? Based on Mary's understanding of Grimm, this guy had never been able to complete a mission smoothly. Every time, he would make a big mistake. Grimm just smiled and did not say anything. However, when he wiped his hand on the table, there were 5 mysterious dark red crystals, 1 big and 4 small. What is this? Mary curiously reached her hand towards the biggest crystal, but the moment her little hand touched the mysterious crystal, she quickly retracted her hand. With a sizzling sound, a cluster of flames ignited on the mysterious crystal stone and burned her finger. Even with Mary's vampire physique, the few fingers that came into contact with the crystal were charred black. However, she didn't care about it at all. With a light wave of her slender hand, her fingers became smooth and white once again as the burn marks disappeared. Mary did not act rashly. Instead, she focused her mind and tried to recall. What happened just now was not caused by an outsider, nor was it the effect of a spell formation. It was the crystal's natural defense mechanism. It was as if it also had a consciousness. "What is this?" Mary asked again. She looked at Grim with an unfriendly expression, revealing a pair of sharp canines, as if she would bite him at any moment. "Rank 2 life crystal." Grim revealed a strange smile as he spoke word by word. Mary's tender red lips repeated the words a few times before she suddenly came to a realization. "Level 2 essence crystal? You killed a rank 2 monster? Where's the body? Has the blood been extracted? Hurry, tell me." Ugh. Grim spread his hands, speechless. "If I really met a rank 2 monster, do you think I would be able to come back alive?" "That's true." Mary smiled embarrassedly. She was a little shocked at her own loss. Who asked her to be in the most important transition period of a vampire's life? Who asked her to increase her strength the fastest by sucking the blood of the strong? These two things added together were enough to make Mary crazy. Once she heard about powerful creatures, she couldn't help but become restless and fanatical. Of course, in Mary's eyes, the current Grim could barely be considered a strong person. However, no matter what Mary said, Grim would not allow her to suck his blood. According to the AI chips analysis, anyone who had their blood sucked by a vampire would have their strength reduced to varying degrees. And these losses were very likely the key to the vampire's evolution by sucking blood. To put it simply, if Grim allowed Mary to drink his blood, he would most likely lose his attributes, which he valued the most: constitution and spirit. The Toriel bloodline acolyte in the gloomy crypt was the best example. That guy had already reached the peak of the acolyte rank and was about to hold the advancement ceremony, but he was defeated by Grim's magic puppets. He would only need to rest for a week or two at most to recover from this kind of injury. However, the information from his family showed that the Toriel's spiritual force had declined. Although it did not fall below 20 points, it was enough to affect his advancement. Therefore, Grim had reason to suspect that the vampires were able to absorb the bloodline factors of the body through sucking blood to strengthen themselves and weaken their enemies. Just imagine, in this case, how would Grim dare to let Mary suck his blood? After exchanging information, Mary hurriedly rushed into the mission hall to find a suitable acolyte mission for her. Grim returned to his residence and began to listen to the goblin merchant cabbie's report. In the 3 months that Grim had been away, the Swamp Tower had become lively with the influx of external information and resources. It was no longer as lifeless as before. With Mary's support, KB opened the first gnome shop in the High Tower. The shop did not have many products to choose from, but they were all rare resources that were hard to find in the outside world. In addition, Cabby had recently set his sights on the group of low-level acolytes and began to purchase magic materials and ordinary resources that they could not use at the moment at a low price. However, for a small shop like this to be fully operational, it would require an endless supply of high-grade goods. Otherwise, it would be difficult to attract acolytes. After listening to Cabby's report, Grim nodded in satisfaction and took out a large pile of magic gems and materials from his storage belt. Most of them were underground fire diamonds. After all, compared to the acolytes who wandered around the periphery of the volcano world in search of treasures, Grim had ventured into the depths of the lava countless times. His chances of finding high-grade magic gems were much higher than theirs. Most of the fire diamonds and magic gems in the periphery were washed out from the lava when the volcano was active. They had also been captured and filtered by the flame creatures, so of course they would not be of good quality. The fire diamonds that Grim brought back from the lava sea were all fist-sized fire diamonds of the highest quality. There was even a giant fire diamond that Grim had thrown to Cabby and asked him to find someone to carve it into the shape of a jade pillow. This way, Grim could use it to meditate in the future, and the effect would be even better. After Cabby happily left with his waste bag, the smile on Grim's face gradually faded. He began to seriously think about an extremely important piece of information. In the 3 months that Grim had been away, Wizard Anderson had publicly announced that he had accepted the evil bug in Tick as his disciple. According to Cabby, the evil bug and tick had been spending most of his time on the 5th floor of the Wizard Tower. Who knew what he was doing there with Wizard Anderson? Faced with the possibility of two enemies joining forces, Grimm's joy of becoming a quasi-wizard disappeared. He once again felt the urgency of not having time for him. After becoming a quasi-wizard, with the protection of the family contract, Wizard Anderson might not dare to do anything to him in the open, but it was possible for him to do something in the dark. Since he was so close to that evil bug and tick, could it be that he wanted to use him to deal with him? Grimm let out a bitter laugh. Ever since he had thoroughly understood the conflict of interest between Wizard Anderson and Mary, he knew that sooner or later he would arouse Wizard Anderson's hatred. However, he did not expect the enemy to act so quickly and so urgently. In the eyes of these sinister and cunning wizards, all acolytes were just a bunch of walking materials. If it was not for the higher-ups of the wizards restricting their actions, this group of selfish fellows would not allow a new wizard to appear and compete with them for scarce resources. However, no matter how the enemy planned, as long as his speed of improvement exceeded their expectations, any dangers and traps would disappear, and it would be difficult to change his direction. After analyzing all of this, Grimm immediately drew up a long work plan for the following period of time. Under his arrangements, for the next half a year, his time would probably be full every day, and it would be difficult for him to find a single bit of free time. In this mysterious foreign world, in order to protect his own life, Grimm also put all of his energy and time into learning and studying magic. Goblin KB's room. After returning from his master's residence, KB fell into a limitless frenzy. Every time he took out a magic gem from his bulging waist pouch, he would happily dance for a while, kissing it repeatedly before taking out his magic wand to check the gem's attributes and quality. Looking at the pile of gems in front of him that was getting higher and higher, KB's heart was filled with joy. At this moment, he could not wait to run to his master again and passionately kiss the tip of his master's shoes. Perhaps this was the only way for his master to truly experience KB's passion and loyalty. However, in this joyous process, there was a small setback. KB found a mysterious white stone the size of a fist in the pile of gems that his master had thrown over. No matter what method he used to check it, he could not find out its attributes, nor could he confirm what kind of magic gem, material, or magic beast egg it was. Even after using the magic wand to check it, the feedback in his mind was simple information such as unknown object from another world. Since the magic wand said it was an object and not a living creature, it meant that it was not a magic beast egg. Since his master had placed it in the pile of gems, it definitely meant that it was not a magic beast egg. What KB was most concerned about was the foreign world mentioned in the information. Could this be a mysterious gem from another world? Chapter 135. While Cabby was busy dealing with the large amount of fire diamonds and gems his master had brought back, Grimm began to seriously examine his gains from the trip to the volcano. 1 rank 2 molten core giant and 4 rank 1 molten core giant crystal cores. Even an official magus would be envious of such a harvest. With Grimm's current ability to create magic puppets, he could not deal with rank 2 elemental cores. After all, any external changes would cause harm to the core itself. The defensive mechanism of the rank 2 giant crystal core was enough to give Grimm a hard time. He could not possibly waste his mental energy to control the alchemy table and prevent the core from going berserk at the same time. A single mistake at a crucial moment could destroy this precious treasure that he had obtained with great difficulty. Hence, before his strength increased again, he could only keep this rank 2 giant crystal core and deal with it when he was more confident. As for the remaining 4 rank 1 giant crystal cores, they were the focus of Grimm's attention. Using the most primitive method, Grimm carefully scanned each of the cores into his mind. The AI chip statistics even included the sturdiness of each crystal core, the smoothness of each crystal surface, the growth direction and thickness distribution of each strand of crystal. The most important thing was the surface area that each crystal core could be used for. Based on this huge amount of data, the AI Chip needed to design the most suitable three-dimensional spell formation for each core, and then go through multiple optimizations so that they could be perfectly accommodated by the core. The molten core giants were creatures of both fire and earth attributes. Using only one of these attributes was undoubtedly a huge waste. Hence, in order to fully tap into their potential, the AI Chip needed a long period of analysis and calculations to come up with the best solution. After handing all this over to the AI Chip, Grimm spent his days learning fire elemental spells. Ever since his body had become a body of fire, Grimm could learn fire elemental spells with half the effort. In the past, it would have taken him a month or two to master spells, but now he could learn one spell a day. However, Grimm still had to put in a lot of effort to learn spells that required related knowledge and had many different effects. Grimm's team of earth puppets had been wiped out in one fell swoop during the trip to the volcano, and it would take a long time for him to recover the 5 rock python crystal cores that he had lost. The swamp tower didn't have a large number of life crystals that Grimm needed, so he could only ask Mary to purchase some when she was out on mission. However, they would only be able to purchase quasi-sorcerer level essence crystals at most, and each one of them was extremely expensive. After all, Grimm was more picky about the quality and purity of the crystal core. Wanting to collect resources of a magus rank in the acolyte market was simply wishful thinking. According to their relationship, if Grimm needed any high-ranking wizard resources, the easiest way to get them would be through Wizard Anderson. Unfortunately, Wizard Anderson was a selfish guy. He only cared about his own witchcraft experiments all day long. He didn't care about his apprentices at all. Therefore, in comparison, the apprentices from the Swamp Tower were more than half as strong as the apprentices from the other wizard towers. The 5th floor of the Swamp Tower. Late at night, Intik came to this place again. In a stone hall, a huge magic circle had been drawn on the hard stone floor. It was covered with all kinds of mysterious runes and lines. Even if Intik tried his best to recall, he could only recognize 2 or 3 runes that he was familiar with. These were all mysterious runes related to bloodlines, souls, and fusion. As for their specific uses, he was sorry to say that with the knowledge of an acolyte, he really couldn't decipher them. However, what shocked Intik the most was the thick smell of blood within the magic circle and the dark bloodstains on the floor that couldn't be washed off. These were the most direct evidence of the torture he had suffered in the past few months. If it wasn't for the crazy desire to become stronger supporting him, even his half-insect body wouldn't have been able to withstand the repeated bloodline refinement and fusion. Anderson, who was wearing a black wizard robe, was adjusting the magic circle in front of him. As he murmured, his 10 ghost-like fingers danced. Mysterious runes appeared out of thin air one after another, continuously fusing into the magic circle. Thus, the various energy circuits and nodes of the magic circle were lit up in an orderly manner. Take off your clothes and stand in the wizard ring. Wizard Anderson's instructions were simple and straightforward, but his words were filled with an irresistible majesty. Intik did as he was told, his face deathly pale. After taking off the cloth robe covering his body, what a twisted and terrifying half-insect body was exposed to the air. There were very few parts of his body that belonged to a human, and every part of his body displayed extremely obvious characteristics of an insect. The strange and ever-changing multicolored pupils, the many small compound eyes surrounding the pupils, the layers of lotus petal-like mouth parts, the hard black carapace that covered the entire body, and the side-like appendages that were folded on both sides of the body. Ever since he turned himself into this strange appearance that didn't look like a human or an insect, Intik had never shown his body to anyone. It could be said that everyone who had seen his original form had been devoured by him, becoming nutrients for the growth of this half-insect body. But today he could only humiliatingly reveal his body. The cold, gloomy air and the bone-chilling stone floor made him feel extremely uncomfortable, but he still stood perfectly straight in the middle of the magic circle that could only accommodate one person. Good. Very good. Wizard Anderson's cold voice sounded illusory in the spacious hall. Although your body's functions have decreased a little, the effect of the bloodline fusion is not bad. Brat, if you can survive this witchcraft experiment, you will definitely become the one and only blood-sucking giant insect in this world. Following Master Anderson's shriek that was close to madness, the surging energy in the spell formation gradually converged into the witchcraft circle. The intense magical energy even illuminated Intitch's body, penetrating through his internal organs and bones. In this strong light, a hazy, illusory, and fragmented soul shadow stood where Intich was, blankly observing everything around it. Above the magic circle, a crack appeared in the ceiling, and a fist-sized, sparkling, and translucent soul diamond slowly descended from it. Through the light of the magic circle, one could see a sparkling, translucent, blood-colored crystal rolling at the core of the soul diamond. Step by step, it slowly controlled the soul diamond, allowing it to attach itself to Intich's forehead. Following a scorched smell, the soul diamond emitted a high temperature, scorching Intich's forehead until black smoke came out, forcefully embedding itself there. The blood-colored crystal rotated, and with every rotation, a strand of blood-colored gossamer shot out. Under the guidance of the soul diamond, this strand of blood-colored gossamer slowly fused into Intich's body. At first, this transformation was not very obvious. As more and more blood-colored gossamer fused into Intich's body also began to turn dark red, and the blood-colored magic patterns were faintly discernible. To Intich, this kind of body modification was no different from terrifying torture. How could his half-insect body, which had already taken over the dominant position in his body, allow the contamination of a foreign bloodline? In the depths of his bloodline, where outsiders could not pry into, a battle of life and death was unfolding, and the situation could be said to be extremely tragic. Under the suppression of the magic circle, the advantage of the half-insect bloodline's home ground was constantly being weakened. However, the weakened vampire bloodline, with the support of the tower's endless energy, seemed to be able to move with ease. It continuously expanded its territory in Intich's body, taking over cities and seizing territory. His own body had become a battlefield of life and death for the two bloodlines. At this moment, Intich was like an ordinary human who had been stripped of all his mysterious abilities. Even the cold air in the hall made him shiver, unable to withstand the cold. Both bloodlines were extremely powerful, and both viewed the other as contaminating their own bodies. There is absolutely no possibility of compromise and coexistence. In every corner of Intich's body, the genes of the two different bloodlines were locked in a fierce battle. Every time one of the bloodlines weakened, it would try to invade the body's genes that were still considered normal, and then assimilate and infect more of its comrades, endlessly joining the battle. Yes, this was a battle of dominance between the half-insect bloodline and the vampire bloodline. Unless one side completely overwhelmed the other, or the host body became too weak to continue, this battle would continue forever. As the battle progressed, Intich's eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and even other parts of his body kept seeping out a black, pungent, sticky liquid, which slowly flowed down his body. These were the life factors that had died in the bloodline war. Intich's life force was also starting to become feeble. Sensing that the host body was already extremely weak, and that he could die at any moment in this battle that went deep into the bloodline and soul, the two different bloodlines finally retreated and compromised. They curled up in their respective source domains, slowing down the squeezing of the host body and constantly keeping an eye on the movements of the different bloodlines. The half-insect bloodline, which used the insect queen as its host, curled up in Intich's brain, while the vampire bloodline modified Intich's heart and placed itself in it. Although the initial wish of the bloodline fusion wasn't realized, the coexistence of the bloodline had basically been realized. Wizard Anderson, who had been wholeheartedly monitoring the movements within Intich's body, finally let out a sigh of relief. With a slight movement of his power of the will, a hidden wave of the will was triggered. Taking advantage of the fact that Intik's soul, body, and bloodline were at their weakest, the soul-blood contract embedded in the soul diamond also took the opportunity to fuse with his body. Intik still had the power of the will of a quasi-wizard, after all. Although he was weak, he wouldn't be completely ignorant of the approaching danger. However, before he could plan a counterattack, that soul-blood contract had already been branded into his soul. Therefore, in the next second, he who was naked once again became docile and obedient. "I await your orders, Great Master Anderson." Chapter 136. Cabby was frustrated. It was the mysterious white stone that made the usually optimistic and positive creature feel troubled. Unable to understand the usage of the mysterious white stone, Cabby tossed it to the side and busied himself with his goblin shop. He didn't have the time to find an appraiser for it. But after 2 days of hard work, the white stone suddenly glowed. The white stone laid silently on the wooden table by the window, emanating a faint white light under the hazy moonlight. Yes, that was the light emitted by the white stone itself, and not the reflected moonlight. Cabby was extremely certain of this. Cabby approached White Rock step by step, carefully touching it with his hand. It wasn't hot nor cold. The white light didn't come from a heat source, but a mysterious magical energy within the white stone. From the fact that it could absorb moonlight and convert it into its own energy, Cabby deduced that it was a special magical equipment from another plane of existence. With this thought, Cabby fished out another magical crystal to test it out. However, what surprised him was that the moment the magical crystal approached the white stone actually disassembled and deformed with a cracking sound. After a series of disassembly that left Cabby dazzled, a mysterious magical machine that resembled a communication mirror appeared before him. The magical machine extended a mechanical arm to grab the magical crystal and stuffed it into a slot on its abdomen. Then, a strange mechanical voice echoed in the room. "Discovered a basic energy crystal. Can be used as an energy source. Magical core serial number 03768. Estimated recovery rate of 17%. Activating." Then, with a series of strange creaking sounds, the mysterious white stone that was the mana core actually stood up and aimed its light screen at the goblin KB. After the light screen shook violently, an incomparably enormous glass eye suddenly appeared. Then a strange, noisy, hoarse voice sounded from within. "Strange, strange. How did a magical core that hasn't moved for over 200 years suddenly come to life? Hey, little fella, did you activate this magical core?" The voice coming from the mana core was definitely a language Cabby had never heard or learned before. But what was going on? When the voice entered Cabby's ears, he inexplicably understood the meaning behind it. "Who are you? How did you get into this thing? This? What? What is this thing?" Kobe's cowardly nature flared up again. Judging from the size of this guy's eyeballs, he was definitely a terrifying giant. Once it came out, would he still have a way out? At this moment, Cabby was filled with regret. Why didn't he tell his master about this earlier? Perhaps only its miraculous master could save it from the giant's jaws. While Cabby was struggling intensely with his thoughts, the glass eye on the light screen moved back a set distance, finally allowing him to clearly see the other party's appearance. Unexpected. The other party's appearance was almost the same as it. They were both slightly over a meter tall with green skin, 2 big ears, a long and sharp nose, and a head of short, messy, yellow hair. The huge glass eye he saw earlier was actually a special pair of goggles worn by the other party. The opponent was also a gnome. The gnome wore a dirty white gown and had a drawing pen clipped to his ear. His eyes were equipped with a magnifying glass, which made him look strange. But no matter how strange he looked, Cabby was certain that he was a gnome. After looking left and right for a long time, the gnome didn't expect the communication request from a distant plane to be from a gnome. Hence, after grumbling for a long time, it finally became more amiable and warmly conversed with Cabby. "Are you a gnome too?" Cabby asked timidly. "Little fella, You're facing the greatest inventor of the Gnome Empire, Duke Gazruvi. You'd better use honorifics when you ask me questions. The yellow-haired gnome on the other side of the light screen waved his arms and threatened in dissatisfaction. Then, Great Duke Gazruvi, can you tell me what this thing is? Also, why can I understand what you're saying? F*CK. Seems like you don't know anything, little fella. The yellow-haired gnome cursed wildly before explaining helplessly. What you're seeing now is the mana core I invented. Super long-distance mana mechanical communication teleportation device. Simply put, it's a device that allows two gnomes to communicate and teleport items across a long distance. Also, you can understand me because you're a gnome too. As long as you're a gnome, no matter which plane you're in, you'll naturally understand the gnome language. This is a language unique to us gnomes. Cabby's eyes widened as he couldn't believe his ears. Since this device was invented by you, why did it end up here? Cabby asked curiously. Since this device is called Super Long Distance Mana Mechanical Communication Teleportation Device, it's naturally used for interplane transactions. When I was young, I made a few hundred of them and used random teleportation to throw them to different places in the multiverse. The local powerhouses who picked up this device naturally became my customers. If I remember correctly, this device number 03768 was connected to a powerful molten core giant. Unfortunately, it was very poor and didn't have anything good on it. You're actually a great interplane merchant? Cabby, who was greedy by nature and loved to take advantage of others, widened his eyes. Evidently, the Gnome Empire's chief inventor was far less worthy of his reverence than the interplane merchant. Of course, as the Gnome Empire's greatest engineer, inventor, and interplane merchant, I, Duke Gazlurvi, am famous throughout the multiverse. You've mentioned the Gnome Empire many times? What is that? Cabby asked curiously. Gazlurvi shouted proudly. The Gnome Empire is obviously the Gnome Empire. This is a plane that we, the gnomes, have established our own kingdom. Here we, the gnomes, are the true masters of the plane. Since you've asked, it must be because the status of the gnomes is very low in your plane, right? Cabby clenched his fists excitedly, his eyes filled with little stars of envy. But then he remembered his own situation and could not help but lower his ears dejectedly. Gazlurvi sighed silently. He had seen such a scene many times. In most material planes, the gnomes were discriminated against, reduced to a pitiful state where they could be bullied by anyone. They had no combat ability and no talent. Even among magical creatures, they were at the bottom of the food chain. However, Gazlurvi was very curious about this foreign gnome who had inadvertently activated his magic core. After patiently asking, he found out that this dejected little gnome was actually a servant of a mysterious magus. Cabby was bragging. When Gazlurvi could not help but question whether Cabby was a penniless wretch, the resentful Cabby opened his waist pouch and displayed his treasures one by one. There were fist-sized fire diamonds, sapphires, rubies, green agates, topaz, emeralds, as well as rare night vision stones, burning stones, and red sharp stones that had great regional characteristics. Looking at the inconspicuous little gnome taking out so many rare gems in one go, Gazlurvi's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. He did not care about those elemental gems, as such gems were common in the plane he came from. However, he had never seen the special gems or materials like night vision stones, burning stones, and red sharp stones, and he was very interested in a few of them. In the Gnome Empire where he came from, the most powerful thing was all kinds of magical machinery. What drove the magical machinery was a large number of energy crystals and unique magical gems. If he could bring these special magical gems back and understand the existence and coexistence of the special energy within, it would undoubtedly be of great help to the magical machinery. So the two gnomes chatted more and more, and finally reached a trade agreement, preparing to secretly carry out a cross-plane material exchange. The trade list from both sides was terrifyingly long. What Cabby listed were magical gems, witchcraft materials, and some special wizard resources that he had heard of or come into contact with in the sorcerer world. On the other hand, Gazlervi listed all kinds of powerful but dangerous magical machinery, as well as some special resources from the gnome plane. After both sides browsed through each other's trade list, when they were interested in a certain item, they would start to make a targeted offer and bargain. Goblins were indeed known as the most greedy creatures in the world who only cared about their own profits. These two gnome brothers were chatting happily just now, but when it came to the price of the items, they were extremely stingy and haggling over every single detail. For the price difference of 1 or 2 magic crystals, they would blow their beards and stare at each other, loudly cursing all the female relatives of the other party. If the other party did not give in, they would go their separate ways. That was why Cabby did not sleep for the entire night. He fought with the greedy, stingy, shameless, selfish, stingy, unhygienic, and smelly Duke Gazlervi for more than 20 hours before they settled on 2 cross-plane transactions worth less than 5 magic crystals. In order to maintain communication with the other party, the gnome Cabby spent more than 3 magic crystals a night. However, both sides did not find it strange at all. Cabby even danced with joy at being able to lower the price of the other party's magic crystal. On the other hand, Gazlervi roared angrily, loudly cursing Cabby for being the most shameless and green-skinned gnome he had ever seen. Chapter 137. 3 months later, when Grim woke up from his long meditation, he couldn't help but show a trace of worry on his face. Chip, how's my meditation efficiency this time? Calculating. Spiritual force has increased by 0.007. If I want to reach the peak of 20 points, I'll need 139 days. The corner of Grim's mouth twitched. He now had a body of fire, and he had used the tower's authority to create a residence with dense fire elemental energy. His daily staple food was magical food that was beneficial to his physical body and spiritual force. Coupled with the fire diamond pillow and the deep sea flower, which was helpful for meditation, his daily progress was only 0.007 points. This made Grim, who could easily reach 0.05 points in his meditation, feel extremely uncomfortable. Ever since he became a quasi-magus, Grim realized that basic meditation and studying spells did not have much effect on the growth of spiritual force. With the help of the AI, Chip, he was able to monitor the growth of his spiritual force in detail every day. As for those quasi-magi who did not have this method, their efficiency was 10 times lower than his. What did they rely on to endure this especially difficult period of pain? Grim closed his eyes and thought for a while, and then came to a realization. It seemed that those quasi-magi rarely stayed in their residences to meditate and accumulate spiritual force. Instead, most of them ran around, doing their best to train themselves through missions. In the past, Grim had always thought that they did this for the sake of resources. Now, it seemed that it was because of the slow growth of spiritual force that they wanted to stimulate their growth through wandering on the edge of life and death. This was not a bad idea. AI. Chip, you've analyzed for a long time. Have you found a reason for the slow growth of spiritual force? Beep. Mission model completed. Analysis shows that the main task of an acolyte is to increase the concentration of elemental energy in their body and strive for a qualitative change. That way, they can become a magic creature, a magus. After entering the quasi-magus stage, the slow growth of spiritual force is because the accumulation of elemental energy is reaching a bottleneck. Due to the lack of a necessary core, the energy accumulated in the early stages will cause unpredictable disturbances due to the characteristics of the elemental energy. This causes the efficiency of energy accumulation to be greatly reduced in the later stages. Similar attraction and repulsion of elemental energy. This was the basic theory of elemental magic that had been concluded by previous magi. To put it simply, among all the elemental particles of the same attribute were more likely to gather together, thus forming a homogenization of space. Sorcerers called this phenomenon same-sex attraction. However, there was a limit to this kind of fusion. Once it reached or exceeded this threshold, Magi would find it extremely difficult to fuse elemental particles of the same attribute. It was as if there was a great repulsion between these particles of the same sex, refusing to get too close to each other. Therefore, some wizards called it universal repulsion. Elemental particles have both the same attraction and the same repulsion. The key lies in the local concentration of the elemental particles. If the concentration was lower than the threshold, it would show attraction, and if it was higher than the threshold, it would show repulsion. The wizards had not come to a detailed conclusion yet, or perhaps they had, but Grimm was not qualified to know about this kind of witchcraft knowledge. Chip, is there any way to solve the current problem? Beep. Data analysis completed. There were two possible solutions. The first option was to transplant the crystal. A sorcerer apprentice spiritual force is scattered and lacks the necessary constraints of a core. The fire-type crystal could be implanted into the brain by transplanting the crystal to weaken the repulsion of the fire elemental particles. Advantage: it can solve the problem of slow growth of spiritual force and increase the success rate of advancement. Disadvantage: the fire-type crystal implanted from the outside cannot be compared to the elemental core condensed by the body. It will limit the possibility of further development. The second option was to stimulate the spiritual force. Directly bypass the weak stimulation of the spiritual space caused by the accumulation of elemental particles. Instead, find a way to stimulate the spiritual body and reduce the toughness of the spiritual body to increase the upper limit of the spiritual force. Grimm furrowed his brows. Well, due to the limitations of the Chip's knowledge, Grimm did not like either of the two options it proposed. The first option was simply neglecting the essentials and destroying one's future. It was only useful for those quasi-sorcerers who had no hope of advancing. The second option was not very reliable either. He did not know if this method could produce a magus, but it would definitely produce a lunatic. Since it was difficult to use the unorthodox method, Grimm could only focus his attention on the origin of the magus. Spiritual force. The reason why human magi set 21 points as the basic threshold for breaking through the limits of humans to become a magus was probably because 20 points was the limit of a human's body. After crossing this threshold, human magi would have some fundamental differences from regular humans and would be more similar to a magical creature. Hence, the huge difference in strength between a magus with 21 points and a quasi-sorcerer with 20 points was probably because the basic data of their bodies were completely different. With the help of so many advantages, Grimm did not need to go through the life and death trials to increase his spiritual force by 0.007 points every day. If other quasi-sorcerers knew about this, they would definitely go crazy with jealousy. However, to Grimm, this was still too slow, because the recent changes to the demonic worm in tech made his heart palpitate. He had originally thought that his progress had far surpassed everyone else, and that it was only a matter of time before he caught up to Intech. However, after encountering Intech in the high tower, Grimm's thoughts became uncertain. That demonic worm Intech seemed to be changing every day, and the immense spiritual pressure it exuded was becoming more and more obvious. According to the AI chip scan, Intech's spiritual force had most likely exceeded half, which was 50 points. He had only become a quasi-sorcerer half a year ago. This meant that the demonic worm Intech's spiritual force was not any weaker than his own. Of course, this could also be related to Intech entering and exiting the 5th floor of the Swamp Tower every 2 to 3 days. From the AI chip scan, it was very likely that Magus Anderson had conducted bloodline fusion experiments on Intech's body. This was because the AI chip had actually detected a familiar scent of blood on Intech's body. Although the scent of blood was extremely weak, the AI chip's cell-level genetic detection was still able to pick it out down to the finest detail. What made Grimm even more furious was that the source of this bloodline was very likely Mary. This meant that the blood sample that Mary had previously given to Magus Anderson had been used on the demonic worm in Tech's body. The two bloodlines battled in Tech's body all day, which was equivalent to him living on the edge of life and death every day. It was no wonder that his spiritual force was increasing rapidly every day. It was impossible to reconcile with the demonic worm in Tech. What worried Grimm the most was that if Tech reached the peak of a quasi-sorcerer before he did, then something that he did not wish to see might happen. From the publicly available data in the books on magic spells, it could be seen that the success rate of magi in the scattered forest of towers was not high. Basically, it was already a miracle that 2 or 3 out of 10 quasi-sorcerers could advance to become magi. Although innate potential played a big role in the advancement ceremony, luck was still the main factor that determined the success rate. Although a powerful quasi-sorcerer had a higher chance of advancing than a weak one, it was not 100%. Some people with outstanding innate potential, who were gifted by the heavens, still had the possibility of failure when advancing to become a magus. As for those with inferior innate potential, if they were lucky enough, they could become the rulers of this world in one fell swoop. Magi. Hence, in the Magus continent, any quasi-sorcerer would tremble with fear during the advancement ceremony, afraid that they would miss a step and become a failure in life. After all, after a failed advancement ceremony, the upper limit of a quasi-sorcerer's spiritual force would decrease significantly, and the chances of advancing to the next rank would drop by 50%. Hence, apart from those who were favored by the heavens, no Magus family would be willing to invest in a quasi-sorcerer who had failed once. This was what Grimm was most worried about. If that Tech reached the peak of a quasi-sorcerer first, and he only needed to tell the Magi in charge of the advancement ceremony that he could guarantee a 100% success rate by devouring Mary, then what would happen? One would be a quasi-sorcerer who had signed a family contract. The other would be a quasi-sorcerer who had signed a service contract. One had a 100% success rate, and the other had 2 unknown success rates. If Magus Anderson was involved, then Mary's life would really be in danger. Grimm didn't tell Mary about this. In a situation where there was no other way to break the stalemate, telling the impulsive Mary about this would not help. Unless Grimm could catch 8 or 10 magi in one go and feed Mary, she would have to rely on herself to break the stalemate. Grimm lowered his head and looked at his right hand. There were 2 black beetle fragments in his palm. Using his powerful elemental sight, Grimm could barely see the constantly changing mastodons on the fragments. One of the fragments only had the word "Save me," while the other had the word "Devour Mary." These 2 fragments did not appear at the same time. The first one had crept in through the window a month ago when Grimm was meditating in his dwelling. A black beetle the size of a fingernail had crawled onto his wooden table and exploded, leaving behind a strange shell with the word banned. As for the second one, it had only appeared a week ago. Chapter 138. Without a doubt, these beetles were sent by the evil bug in Titch. Save me? Could he be asking me for help? Devour Mary? Why did he betray his best possible plan to me? These questions were analyzed by the AI chip, and they quickly formed a terrifying plot that chilled Grimm to the bone. Titch was probably already under Magus Anderson's complete control, which was why he couldn't help but ask for help from his enemy. As for how a quasi-wizard who was completely under the control of Magus could hide his soul from Anderson, it probably had something to do with his unique bug body. Although he was lucky enough to retain his consciousness in Magus Anderson's plot, it was obvious that he was no longer able to break free from Anderson's control. That was why he revealed Anderson's plot to get Grimm to intervene. But knowing this, what could Grimm do about it? Could he complain to Wizard Kogan of the Salubo family about Magus Anderson's audacity? This might cause Magus Anderson to be punished, but it would be difficult to change the situation. If Anderson was willing to give up his control, the Salubo family would be more than happy to take over a family Magus who was completely under their control. That way, Mary would still not be able to escape her pitiful fate. Defeat and kill Anderson? This was something that was even more impossible to accomplish. If the 4 powerful magic puppets that Grimm had envisioned were all completed and Wizard Anderson was lured into some special place, along with Mary and Titch, there was a slight chance that they could kill him. But the success rate of such a plan was less than 12%, and Grimm was not willing to take such a huge risk. In the past, he only had a vague idea of how powerful a magus was. But after more than half a year of training, Grimm finally had a rough idea of what it would be like. Take Grimm's beginner acolyte as an example. Their bodies were no different from normal humans. The only difference was that they had 1 or 2 spells of average power, and they had very few of them. During this period, if apprentices went out on missions, they would rather hire mercenaries to protect them from mortal attacks, such as crossbow arrows, throwing knives, and mechanical traps. Once they became intermediate acolytes, their power would start to show. At this stage, they would either have chosen a direction for their development, or they would have some powerful methods that normal humans would not be able to match up to. Even the militia of an ordinary town would find it hard to provoke such a terrifying character. However, with the right methods, it was still possible for an ordinary person to kill an intermediate apprentice. However, once they reached the higher ranks, the secular army would find it hard to match them. Imagine a person with the powerful vitality of a bison, the running speed of a cheetah, and the powerful strength of an adult strongman. Such a person could turn the secular army upside down, even without the help of witchcraft. If supplemented with powerful witchcraft, it would be a piece of cake for him to destroy an army of 1 to 200 people. Of course, if a human noble was willing to pay a huge price. Relying on superior military equipment and fearless soldiers, if they were to sacrifice the lives of more than 300 soldiers, they would be able to defeat a high-level acolyte. By the time a sorcerer apprentice becomes a quasi-wizard, the armies of ordinary nobles would no longer be effective against them. In fact, if this quasi-sorcerer was willing to engage in guerrilla warfare, he could even drag down some small dukedoms. To deal with a quasi-sorcerer, they would have to sacrifice the lives of at least 1,000 elite warriors. As for whether or not he could kill him, that would depend on his luck during the battle. Of course, the power estimates above were based on the situation where there was no mysterious power to support the power of the secular world. In the current sorcerer continent, if a dukedom did not have the protection of a sorcerer family, it would be impossible for it to survive. Many human kings and grand dukes were all representatives of sorcerer families, mortals who were good at managing their territories, or apprentices who had no hope of advancing. In short, the power of the secular world would always be used by sorcerers, but it would never be the other way around. To deal with a sorcerer, relying on the power of the secular world was no longer enough. The only way to kill a sorcerer was to kill another sorcerer. This famous saying had been deeply engraved into the bones of all mortals. Even the nobles who had the protection of a sorcerer family would not be willing to offend even the most inconspicuous sorcerer. After all, the power of a sorcerer was extremely terrifying. Therefore, after estimating the strength of the enemy and himself, Grimm had long given up on the stupid idea of fighting Wizard Anderson head-on. Although sorcerers were dangerous and scary, as long as they had the right method, sorcerers were still very weak. Every year, there were many sorcerers who accidentally died in dangerous experiments, and there were also many who went deep into the wild forest and never looked back. Most of them perished in the wars of the sorcerer clans. Sometimes it was a territorial war between sorcerer families, and sometimes it was a colonization expedition within a sorcerer family in another plane. In short, if Grimm and the others successfully became sorcerers, they would not be able to avoid participating in one bloody war after another. However, the idea of waiting for Wizard Anderson to dig his own grave was also ridiculous. Wizard Anderson had been staying in the Swamp Tower all year round, almost never taking a step out. It could be seen that he was also a research-type sorcerer, and he was not very good at fighting. But even so, Grimm still did not want to fight him head-on. Since he did not want to fight him head-on, he could only rely on schemes. Therefore, during these days, apart from working hard to improve his strength, Grimm was silently planning and preparing for something. However, the target of his scheme was a sorcerer, so Grimm could only plan for the long term. In any case, Intik still needed more than 3 months to reach the peak of Quasi-Wizard, so there was still time for Grimm to plan. Demonic insect in Tik's residence. This place was already dark and damp like an insect nest, and the ground was covered in white cocoons. Some were already broken, and larvae covered in yellow mucus were crawling out of them. Some were still in good condition. When the runes of the spell formation etched on the floor lit up, they could see the densely packed insects swarm inside. In a corner of the room, there was a mutilated bison carcass with traces of ants and insects gnawing on it. Black cow blood flowed all over the floor, accompanied by a pungent stench. The air in the room was extremely dirty, filled with strong acid, blood, and the stench of decay. Intik did not seem to notice it at all. He sat on the floor with his legs crossed, his body hunched and motionless. Although his body did not move, the gray robe draped over his body was faintly wriggling, swelling up from time to time, and then disappearing. This also indicated that Intik's seemingly calm body was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. Ever since he returned from Anderson's bloodline fusion ceremony, Intik had spent most of his time sitting there like a dead man. He didn't move at all, just like a dead man. But inside his body, a bloody war that was devoid of smoke and shouts had just come to an end. The half-insect bloodline dominated by the corpse-devouring insect queen and the vampire bloodline dominated by the bloodthirsty heart used his body as a battlefield every day, fighting for dozens of rounds. Both sides wanted to devour the other and turn it into nourishment for their own growth. Therefore, when faced with this bloodline war, where the winner would live and the loser would die, neither side was willing to compromise or coexist. If two different bloodlines were so easy to fuse, bloodline sorcerers would have been everywhere long ago. Would there be a need for so many sorcerers to hide in dark and damp towers, carrying out terrifying experiments that mostly yielded no results? If the potential of two bloodlines was not balanced, then one would definitely devour the other. If the potential was balanced, then both sides would definitely suffer, and the host body would collapse. In short, in order to let two incompatible things coexist and prosper together, there seemed to be a lack of a crucial neutralizer in the middle, which made it difficult for the bloodline fusion experiments to achieve the desired results. If this trend continued, the demonic insect in Tik would not be able to escape the fate of having his body and soul destroyed. Originally, in his body, the half-insect bloodline had an absolute advantage in the battle against the vampire bloodline due to the favorable timing, geographical, and human conditions. However, every time the vampire bloodline was about to be destroyed, Wizard Anderson would summon him to the secret room on the 5th floor and inject him with a new source of blood. Relying on this endless supply of blood, the vampire bloodline was able to infect an important organ and transform Intik's heart into the bloodthirsty heart. With the help of the bloodthirsty heart, the vampire bloodline finally gained an advantage in the bloodline war for the first time. Externally, Intik's half-insect body had regressed, and his skin had turned dark red. Intik's head hung low. Even when the two bloodlines were fighting to the point where his life force was greatly damaged and he was on the brink of death, he still did not move. However, in the depths of his sea of consciousness, above the origin of his soul, an even crueler battle was going on. The consciousness imprint formed by the soul-blood contract was etched onto Intik's origin of soul. However, the strange thing was that the part of the origin of soul that carried the soul-blood contract was faintly cracking, and it was about to separate from the rest of the origin of soul. By hiding most of his consciousness on the body of the corpse-devouring bug queen and avoiding the control of Wizard Anderson's consciousness, the demonic insect in Tik could barely maintain his consciousness. At this time, he did not dare to let his main consciousness return to the origin of his soul. Once he returned, the fact that he still had an independent consciousness would be sensed by Wizard Anderson through the soul-blood contract. Therefore, in his body, what was completely controlled by Wizard Anderson was only his split-second consciousness. His main consciousness was peeking to the side, waiting for an opportunity to regain control of his body. Chapter 139. Level 3 of the Swamp Tower within the Alchemy Laboratory. After occupying the highest-level alchemy laboratory, Grimm settled down here and did not take a single step out of it for 3 days and 3 nights. In the first day, he did not do anything other than hold the rank 1 molten core giant, which was about to become his experimental subject. He examined it carefully, allowing the AI chip to do the final modeling and finalize the design. With his powerful X-ray vision, he was able to see through every crystal core, and even every crystal thread in the crystal core, from the direction of its extension to the distribution of the fire and earth elements, as well as the sturdiness of its various parts. Every detail and every node was absorbed into his brain without missing a single detail. He gathered them into groups of data, forming a 3-dimensional and detailed virtual body. After all this was done, Grimm fell onto the floor of the laboratory and fell into a deep sleep. This sleep lasted until dawn the next day. Only then did he yawn and stretch his body before getting up from the floor. He used a spell to summon some clean water to wash his face. After tidying up, he felt that his spirit had once again recovered. Only then did Grimm stand in front of the alchemy table with a solemn expression. After so long of preparation, the design of the new magic puppet had long since been engraved in his mind. Today, he needed to turn it into reality. The corners of Grimm's mouth twitched as a form of encouragement. The hesitation and worry in Grimm's eyes were gradually replaced by determination and confidence. Without hesitation, Grimm waved his hand and activated the alchemy table. A new magic puppet, a new design. In order to fully display the power of the fire and earth element crystal cores, the AI chip had specially created a new 3-dimensional spell formation for them. 5 energy gathering spell formations, 3 elemental strengthening spell formations, 2 elemental conversion spell formations, 2 source field spell formations, 1 lava armor generator, 1 summoning runic spell formation, 1 elemental life bestowment spell formation, 1 consciousness runic spell formation, and a number of energy circuit nodes. Previously, the elementary earth puppet only had 7 spell formations. The lightning giant used a 3-dimensional spell formation, and its core crystal core only had 9 spell formations. However, this egg-sized type 1 molten core giant crystal core was engraved with 16 magus arrays at once, and he even needed to link them together to form a larger and more intricate structure. In his previous life on Earth, this kind of microscopic sculpture, which was so fine that it was at the molecular level, could be completely controlled by an intelligent computer. In this mysterious world, Grimm could only rely on the AI chip's guidance and assistance. The rest of the work had to be done by himself. The entire 3-hour-long rune drawing process did not allow for the slightest carelessness or negligence. During the etching process, any deviation of the rune lines, even the distance of crystal wire, would greatly affect the final product of the magic puppet. If the deviation exceeded the distance of 2 crystal threads, it would mean that the magus rank crystal core, which he had risked his life to obtain, would be wasted. During the etching process, the output of spiritual energy had to be stable and continuous. If it was too shallow, it would affect the efficiency of the elemental energy. If it was too deep, it might pierce through the surface of the crystal core and damage its core. As for stopping midway, it was a great taboo when refining a devil puppet's crystal core. The entire process had to be completed in one go, and not the slightest bit of hesitation was tolerated. In order to maximize the effectiveness of the crystal core, there had to be enough spell formations to complement it. The more spell formations there were, the less room for error during the refining process. Any mistake would result in the destruction of the crystal core. Therefore, in the Magus continent, if a Magus rank crystal core had 10 spell formations etched on it, he would be worthy of the title of Master Alchemist. However, only a Grandmaster Alchemist could carve 16 spell formations in one go. So, naturally, the first Magus rank magic puppet that Grimm had etched had failed. During the etching process, Grimm had used his spiritual energy to control the scorching rays to stay at a certain point for 7 seconds. After the surface of the crystal core had been pierced, the core had exploded the moment it came into contact with the scorching rays. A crystal core worth more than 4,000 magic crystals had been destroyed just like that. There was no time to be upset or regretful. There was no time to lament or grieve. Grimm threw away the remnants of the crystal core in his hand and waved his hand to turn off the alchemy table. He then collapsed onto the ground and fell into a deep sleep. If he had the time, he could have done this after he advanced to become a magus. At that time, with his increased spiritual energy, it would have been much easier. But he did not. Time waited for no man, forcing him to strengthen his strength as soon as possible. Challenging the difficulty of a magus rank crystal core with the body of a quasi-magus was extremely risky. However, he did not have a second option. 7 hours later, Grimm, who had recovered his energy, stood up and courageously stood in front of the alchemy table. Unfortunately, after 2 hours, the second magus rank crystal core had failed as well. This time, Grimm was not in a hurry to lie down. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor and took out some food from his robes to quickly eat and drink. After he had finished eating, he lay on the blanket and fell into a deep sleep. 2 drops of tears silently rolled down his face, but he did not notice them at all. 10 hours later, when his spiritual energy had just recovered, Grimm opened his eyes with the A.I. chips prompt. There was no hesitation in his black pupils, nor was there any regret. There was only stubbornness and determination. After bending his fingers, Grimm once again stood in front of the alchemy table. Perhaps it was due to his sincerity, or perhaps it was due to nature taking its course, but the third magic puppet crystal core was formed just like that. There were no loud roars, nor were there tears of joy. Grimm calmly put away the crystal core and once again lay on the blanket, falling into a deep sleep. 15 hours later, the fourth crystal core was formed. When the last rune was etched, the three-dimensional lines formed a perfect self-consistent spell formation. The elemental energy absorbed from the air began to flow smoothly into the magus ring. Only then did Grimm's silent zombie face show a trace of emotion. He could not tell if it was happiness or heartache, nor could he tell if it was happiness or sadness. After repeatedly tempering his spiritual force, he had long since become exhausted. After tidying up everything in the laboratory, he closed the alchemy table and walked out of the laboratory. After returning to his residence, Grimm let go of everything and fell into a deep sleep. This time, he slept for an entire day and night before he was able to shake off that feeling of weakness and break free from a black nightmare that was constantly sinking him into depravity. Before he could even open his eyes, a gourmet aroma assailed his nostrils. When he opened his eyes, the familiar face that was leaning over the bed and staring at him was filled with confusion, but most of it was a thoughtful expression. On the wooden plate in her hands, there was a piece of beef tenderloin covered in sauce, a piece of fragrant and soft white bread, and a colorful fruit platter. "Is there something you're hiding from me?" Mary asked suspiciously. Although the man in front of him was only 16 or 17 years old, he had a steadiness and experience that many adults could not hope to achieve. Moreover, he always had a calm and composed look on his face. Although this gave his companions more confidence and made them feel that they could rely on him, she always felt that he hid his heart very deeply. However, this extremely tired expression was very rare on him. Every time it appeared, it meant that they were facing an unimaginable problem. What kind of problem forced him to such an extent? Mary was a little confused. This should be the most comfortable and carefree period for them. Both of them had become quasi-wizards, and many of the restrictions that had been on them in the past had disappeared. Even that wizard Anderson had taken care of them and was a lot friendlier. As long as they followed their current path step by step with their talent and potential, it would only take them 1 or 2 years to reach the peak of quasi-wizards. At that time, if they were lucky, They might even become a noble wizard who could control their own fate. At that time, it would be the time when the two of them would be able to live together and officially become partners. It was because everything seemed so perfect that Mary was confused about Grimm's desperation. Based on her contact with Grimm during this period of time, she was sure that there must be a new huge crisis, one that she could not sense. Otherwise, this man would not be so desperate. With Mary's personality, of course, she would directly ask whatever came to her mind. Grimm smiled bitterly and took the plate from Mary's hands. He did not get off the bed and just wolf down the food. After eating and drinking, Grimm held Mary's little hand with a smile on his face and softly asked her about her experience. However, in secret, he quickly communicated with Mary using his power of the will. Since Mary had already sensed it, Grimm did not want to keep hiding it from her anymore. Also, there were a lot of things that needed her to be involved in, so it was necessary to tell her early so that she could be prepared. After telling her everything he knew in one breath, Grimm was prepared to use force to stop Mary from going berserk. However, to his surprise, after understanding everything through the telepathic communication, Mary, who should have been furious, was very calm. She even looked at him with interest. Could it be that the person in front of him was a fake Mary? Just when Grimm could not help but wonder if the person in front of him was a fake, Mary finally smiled and asked, "You did all this for me? Those guys only wanted my life. Why did you fight so hard?" Although she was talking about her own life, looking at her smiling face, it seemed like she did not care about it at all. At a time like this, she did not care about her own life and changed the topic. Grimm was stunned for a moment and said, "Aren't you my partner?" Chapter 140. The man was tall and sturdy, while the woman was seductive and seductive. A romantic drama was about to unfold. However, the two of them were not engrossed in it, and the words they said during their quick exchange made one speechless. That thing on your body is so hard. It hurts so much. If you dare to bite me, I'll blow you away. All right, don't be angry. Besides, your blood is getting sweeter and sweeter. I can't help it." Mary knelt on Grimm's body in an ambiguous position. Her tender red lips had just left his shoulder, and her hand was touching her little canine teeth as she cried out in pain. On Grimm's shoulder, a small flame shield suddenly exploded, and the flames on it had just subsided. One of Grimm's hands was caressing Mary's back, while the other was pressing on her lower abdomen. It could be said that the explosive fire element could blow Mary away with just a thought. "Grimm, the smell on your body is getting more and more delicious. Just let me take a small sip. Just a small sip." Mary licked her red lips and could not help but continue to tempt him. Unfortunately, Grimm was already immune to her tricks. "I'm sorry, I can't take it. You female vampires are too scary. I'm afraid that after you kiss me, I'll fall from a quasi-wizard to a senior acolyte by the time I get out of bed. Look at the situation now. You're still playing around. I can't help it. You vampires have a deep-rooted habit of biting people when you're excited. All right, I'll stop messing around. I'm going to increase my strength while I still have some time." As soon as she finished speaking, a pair of huge leathery bat wings spread out from Mary's back. With a slight flap of the bat wings, she gracefully soared into the air and flew out of the narrow residence. After giving Grimm a charming smile, Mary turned around and left. Seeing that Mary had disappeared, Grimm heaved a sigh of relief. There was nothing she could do. Mary's charm was getting stronger and stronger, and she knew how to use her charm talent more and more. Although Grimm was confident that she would not hurt him, the female vampire's habit of biting people when she was aroused was really creepy. Although he and Mary were both quasi-witches, once Mary bit through the flame protection outside his body, the vampire's sharp fangs would release a terrible hallucinogenic substance the moment it came into contact with his blood. Even a prospective wizard like him could not resist the hallucinogenic ingredients, so those with poor physical resistance would not resist even if Mary sucked them to death. Grimm was not confident that he could withstand a kiss from a female vampire who was about to become a wizard. Although they were just fooling around, The message that Grimm wanted to convey had already been delivered through Soul Whisper. Although Mary was a little hot-tempered, she was still relatively cautious when it came to matters related to her own life. She usually appeared to be irritable because she believed that fangs and claws could solve everything, so she was too lazy to use any crafty schemes. However, when the enemy was a wizard, the profound knowledge and life experience she had accumulated during her apprenticeship would naturally tell her what to do. This was also a necessary survival skill for every wizard apprentice. When fists and fireballs could solve everything, violence was the simplest way to solve the problem. When fists and fireballs could not solve the problem, the intelligence of an apprentice was not to be underestimated. Grimm got off the bed and slowly walked to the hall. After a short spell, he summoned a smooth water mirror. He slowly turned a few rounds in front of the mirror, carefully looking at his own body. After going through the baptism of the underground lava sea, his body was vastly different from before. His sturdy body was draped in a simple robe, and when his body moved slightly, the perfect curves of his muscles could be seen. He had a dark red body, dark red long hair, and even his black pupils had a circle of dark red spots around them. Under his sturdy muscles flowed copious amounts of flesh power. With his strength as the standard, right now, he could compete with an iron-armored rhinoceros, and with his physique and flesh's toughness, he could already resist the piercing of small, sharp weapons. If he also included the high resistance and defense of his flaming body, even if he walked around naked in a magic swamp, the number of magic beasts that could harm him could be counted on one hand. Of course, this was also because the magic beasts in a magic swamp were generally not high in rank. Although he was only 17 years old, his 2-meter-tall sturdy body and glossy skin made it hard to believe that he was an underage kid. His sturdy muscles and dark red luster gave him a trace of a demonic charm that left a deep impression on people. Just as Grimm was sincerely admiring the perfect curves of his body, a burst of laughter came from the side that spoiled his mood. I didn't expect you to have such a hobby. You're becoming more and more like a narcissist." It was Mary. Grimm rolled his eyes. The only one who could freely enter and leave his residence was this Mary who never knocked. Moreover, her movements were swift and her footsteps were light. Many times, even the AI chip could not detect her approach. Grimm awkwardly waved the water mirror away. His arms trembled slightly, and the magic equipment scattered on the ground flew to his body, quickly equipping him. "Didn't you go to practice? Why did you come back?" Grimm asked unhappily. After experiencing so much pain and suffering these few days, he planned to give himself half a day off to properly enjoy the joy and happiness of his sudden increase in strength. Do you think I like to see you twisting and turning in front of the mirror? Your old friend is here, so I came to inform you." "Old friend?" "It's that Alice who fell at your hands twice. She's at the entrance of a swamp tower, and she said that she wants to see you." Asterisk kiss. Asterisk Grimm sucked in a breath of cold air. He just thought that life was pretty good, but now he had a headache again. At the entrance of the swamp tower, dressed in a long princess dress, Alice, who was not tall and looked like an enlarged version of a doll, was standing there expressionlessly. Although she did not show any emotions, an oppressive aura emanated from her petite body, forcing the two high-ranked acolytes to frown. At her feet, Tony, the acolyte who was once familiar with Grimm, was lying on the ground in pain. His arms had been twisted like a fried dough twist, and it seemed that it would be difficult for him to recover without comprehensive treatment. Mad Girl and Eagle-Eye Crusoe stood in front of Alice, but they did not have the slightest intention of making a move. This was because they could actually sense the spiritual undulations of a quasi-magus from this petite and cute Alice. This was the type of spiritual undulations that they hated the most, because in the short span of half a year, they had repeatedly reviewed and understood it 3 to 4 times. Damn it, were quasi-magi so worthless these days? They were appearing one after another. To be honest, Mad Girl and Eagle, I did not object to outsiders becoming quasi-magi. However, the people they were familiar with suddenly became quasi-magi, while they themselves could not achieve the crucial breakthrough. This was a reason why they were so jealous and hateful. Just as they joined hands to resist Alice's violent and ferocious spiritual pressure, footsteps came from the tower behind them. Grim and Mary walked out side by side. Alice retracted her overflowing spiritual pressure and cast a cold, sharp gaze at Grim. Mad Girl and Eagle Eye, who were suffering unspeakably from the pressure, felt their bodies relax and quickly retreated, making way for them. Although they hated Grim and Mary, they could not help but let out a sigh of relief when the two quasi-magi appeared. Alice and Grim's spiritual undulations collided slightly in the air and then retracted at the same time. She had become a quasi-magus. He had also become a quasi-magus. An indescribable feeling of astonishment surfaced in their hearts at the same time. Compared to before, both their appearance and temperament had changed greatly, but their spiritual undulations could not be faked. Therefore, both of them could sense the changes in each other as soon as they touched each other. Of course, it was still obvious what had changed, and it was still as hateful as ever. Are you going to fight me again, or are you going to keep your promise? Grim crossed his arms in front of his chest and gently rubbed his smooth chin. As his strength increased, he became more and more confident in himself, and his charisma had also improved greatly. I'm here, of course. Alice, who was originally full of arrogance, felt a little guilty when facing Grim, who was not any weaker than her. Last time was just an accident. This time, if you can defeat me, I'll be convinced. Are you sure this is the last time, and there won't be a fourth or fifth time? Grim leaned forward slightly, which made his aura even more oppressive. Bullsh asterisk T, you've only defeated me once. The first time was when that B***star vampire ambushed me. It doesn't count. Although she felt her aura weakening, Alice still clenched her fists and argued for her reputation. And after I defeat you this time, I won't kill you. I'll let you go and give you a chance to take revenge in the future. After saying that, she once again snorted at Grim arrogantly. You lost yourself to me last time, so why should I use my own item to fight with myself again? Grim smiled evilly, looking like a strange uncle teasing a little lowly. I knew you would say that, Alice said with a look of disdain as she grabbed a magic scroll from thin air. The last time you went to the Ubayer family's territory to cause trouble, you almost destroyed their resource point. If it wasn't for grandmother Ender blocking that disaster for you, do you think you could have escaped the revenge of the Ubayer family? Their grade 2 magus almost came to choke you to death. Do you think they're all idiots and can't find out what you've done underground? Grim's expression froze slightly. He had indeed not thought it through at that time. He had only been thinking of ways to strengthen himself, but he had neglected the other party's retaliation. Digging up someone's ancestral grave was indeed a bit too much. Then what do you want to do? Grim's tone softened. As long as you accept to fight me again, we, the Northern Witch Branch, will take responsibility for what you've done. Once you sign this magic scroll, our oath will be fulfilled. That's all. You're so eager to defeat me and get rid of the oath you once made. Could it be that you belong to the Destiny Witches? With the help of the AI chip, Grim had an understanding of all the powerful beings in the Magus continent. That was why he could sense something from Alice's impatience. You don't have to care about that. I'm only asking if you're going to sign it. If you sign the contract, we'll fight again. If you win, I'll still be your slave, and we'll take responsibility for what you've done. If you lose, we'll take responsibility for what you've done, but our previous oath will be null and void. I won't kill you, and I'll give you a chance to take revenge. How about it? Do you want to sign it? Of course. Of course I'll sign it. Just wait to be at a disadvantage. Grim laughed loudly. Chapter 141. The chains of law that represented the establishment of the contract entered the bodies of the two. The matter of the new wager had been settled, and there was no way to change it. But before the two could react, a conch pendant hanging on Alice's waist suddenly spewed out thick black smoke and then condensed into the wrinkled face of the poisoned centipede, Ender, in the void. Alice, what are you doing now? Didn't I tell you to get him to cancel the vow? Why is there a new duel in the contract? As the smoky face opened and closed its mouth, a hoarse voice that sounded like the hissing of a poisonous snake rang out. Great-grandmother, please don't interfere. I'll definitely defeat him this time. Don't tell me you've forgotten that I'm a prospective wizard now. And I've also learned that move. Alice's previous fierce and cold demeanor was replaced by a sweet and ingratiating voice as she conversed with the poisoned centipede Ender. The poisoned centipede Ender obviously had full confidence in Alice's abilities. Seeing Alice's resolute attitude, he could not help but waver. But when the poisoned centipede Ender's smoky face turned to Grim, her eyes widened, and she cried out in disbelief, "What's going on? Damn it! Why is he also a prospective wizard? No, I can't." Unfortunately, before she could finish her sentence, Alice lightly patted the conch and isolated her with the power of space. Without the support of a magical tool, the poisoned centipede Ender's head disappeared into thin air. All right, there's no one to disturb us now. Let's go, we'll find a place to fight. Alice had obviously made up her mind. She did not care if she was punished by the poisoned centipede Ender. With that said, Alice turned around and disappeared on the spot with a slight sway of her body. When she reappeared, she was already 300 meters away in the air. Grim frowned slightly. Alice's talent in space sorcery was really astonishing. She could even use space teleportation so smoothly and without any warning, fighting against an opponent who had complete control over the entire battlefield. It would probably be a bitter battle today. Grim did not hesitate. He raised his hand and tossed out a few elemental crystal cores. In the blink of an eye, the strongest warrior under his command, the lightning giant, was formed. As soon as the lightning giant appeared, the many-tower apprentices were shocked to the extreme. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable horror. Mad Girl and Hawkeye felt it more directly, and their eyes were more complicated. They could clearly sense that even the elemental puppet that Grim had summoned at the last minute had the terrifying strength to torture them. Grim took out a bottle of advanced healing potion he had brought back from the Dark Crypt and tossed it to Tony, who was still lying on the ground. He nodded slightly at Tony. Immediately after, the lightning giant bent down and grabbed Grim in his hand. Then, a gale erupted around him, and he instantly turned into a whirlwind that streaked across the sky, closely chasing after Alice. Mary snorted coldly. She did not transform into a vampire bat like before. Instead, her figure flashed, and she leaped into the air. Her slim and tall body froze in the air, and a pair of huge bat wings suddenly spread out behind her. Under the violent flapping, she quickly chased after them. After advancing to a prospective wizard, she could already transform parts of her body. He was no longer unable to fly in his human form, nor was he unable to use blood element witchcraft when he transformed. Now, she could be considered to have truly mastered the vampire's bat transformation. The three quasi-sorcerers used their own methods and flew out of the magic swamp like meteors, heading straight for the wilderness not far away. In a magic swamp, their every move was under the watchful eye of the wizard Anderson, so they could not do as they wished. Thus, without prior consultation, they all chose to fight in the desolate wilderness. After the three powerful acolytes completely disappeared from sight, the many acolytes present all had a myriad of expressions on their faces. Some were fearful, some were overjoyed, some were deep in thought, and some were filled with jealousy. The mad woman hatefully slammed the huge sword in her hand, and the edgeless iron sword silently sank 10 fingers into the limestone floor beneath her feet. As veteran acolytes of the Swamp Tower, they had now become passers-by that the other party did not see. The difference in their hearts was so great that it made them feel disillusioned. The two looked at each other and held back the bitterness in their mouths. They were not in the mood to greet the others and returned to the tower in silence. At this moment, 20 miles away from the magic swamp, Alice's figure flashed slightly, and she appeared in a large wasteland. The place was covered with withered yellow weeds that were half the height of a person. Under the cold wind, the weeds swayed left and right, giving off a desolate and dilapidated appearance. After advancing to a prospective wizard, Alice did not know what kind of improvement she had obtained, but she actually gained such great confidence out of nowhere. However, compared to her, Grim was also full of confidence and looked eager to give it a try. Seeing that Alice had landed and was waiting for him, Grim rode on the lightning giant and flew into the sky, using his special elemental vision to quickly scan the surroundings of the battlefield. After confirming that there was no ambush, he landed again with a flash. At this moment, the red-clothed, snow-skinned, black-winged Mary also caught up with him at lightning speed and landed not far away. Since the two of you are here, let's fight together. Alice stood under a crooked tree, her face full of disdain and arrogance. Mary, who is always irascible and easily angered, suddenly had blood-red eyes. She spread her wings and bared her fangs, intending to pounce forward. However, in the next moment, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky, and a wild electric net that spread unrestrainedly blocked her figure. Don't be fooled by her. If you really go up, I'll be breaking the contract. Even if I defeat her, I'm afraid she can use this as an excuse to break the contract. At this moment, Grim walked down from the lightning giant's open hand and shook his head at Mary. Shameless vile people only have shameless thoughts. How can you compare with me, Lady Alice, with your mediocre martial arts and extremely poor talent? You're just a little vampire. It doesn't matter if you have more or less. If you don't want to see this bastard die an ugly death, then come at me together. Alice scolded with her hands on her hips, looking at Mary with disdain. If it was in the past, the impulsive Mary would have charged forward without a care. During this period of time, she had obviously gained greater control over her bloodline talent. Therefore, facing Alice's blatant provocation, although she could not help but bare her fangs to threaten her, her body slowly retreated with the help of her bat wings, leaving the battlefield to the two of them. Mary did not know when it started, but her trust in Grim had almost reached the level of superstition. In her opinion, Grim would never fight a battle he was not confident in. Since he dared to fight the arrogant Alice alone, he must have a way to deal with her. Therefore, she was not worried about Grim's battle at all. Looking at the female vampire who was not provoked and left the scene cleanly, Alice, who looked like a doll, tore the wild grass beside her angrily and cursed something viciously. All right, there are no outsiders here, so you don't have to pretend to be cute. An apprentice who could advance to a quasi-sorcerer at such a young age must be a black-hearted and ruthless person. Since you want to defeat me to prove your strength, then do it. Grim mocked with a face full of disdain, not showing the slightest pity for the weak. Do it then. You'll regret your decision today. Alice was already gnashing her teeth in anger. Even if they were not on the same page, half a sentence was useless. Although they were both quasi-sorcerers, true respect was earned through fighting. Almost at the same time, their eyes flashed fiercely, and without a word, they made their moves. What was called being as fast as the wind? What was called being as fast as lightning? These were all floating clouds in front of Alice's space shift. Just by relying on this ability to come and go at will, any opponent was as slow as a snail in her eyes, a static image. Almost at the same time when she decided to make her move, Alice appeared less than 5 meters away from Grim. In front of her suddenly stopped. A terrifying hemispherical electric net fell from the sky and covered Grim. As long as she took half a step forward, the high-voltage current that meandered above the electric net would burn her body. Inside the electric net, there was already a world of raging flames. The barrier of fire that was ejected from that damned bastard's body almost overturned the space inside. Not to mention the weeds and soil on the ground. Even the seemingly empty air began to burn. That arrogant bastard smiled at Alice, and then his whole body merged into the flames. Seeing that his master had completed the fire defense, the lightning giant, standing in the air, withdrew the lightning barrier. Countless green-gray whirlwinds instantly formed a huge body, which instantly turned into a sharp arrow and quickly pounced towards Alice. At the same time, inside the barrier that had exploded into a huge sea of fire, 3 blazing fireballs drew arcs in the air and blasted towards Alice's thin and frail body. Facing a pincer attack from above and below, Alice's face showed no fear. In a flash, she left her original position and appeared on the other side of the flame barrier. Then, she pulled and tore with her hands, and a terrifying space crack appeared between her hands. She didn't know how she controlled it, but a great suction force was generated in this space crack. The elemental flames in the fire barrier closest to her were sucked into the crack like moths flying into a flame, disappearing in the blink of an eye. In less than 3 seconds, the sea of fire closest to her had been sucked dry, revealing the charred ground and the rolling grass and wood ashes in the heat wave. Taking advantage of this short period of time, the lightning giant once again pounced towards her. Before he arrived, a blinding chain of lightning had already bombarded him. She teleported a few times in succession, but every time she attacked for a few seconds, the annoying lightning giant would chase after her. In terms of speed, the lightning giant's lightning leap was not inferior to Alice's teleportation by too much. After trying a few times, Alice finally raged again. She appeared in the air 200 meters away with a teleportation. She no longer tried to attack Grimm, but instead scattered her hair and loudly chanted a mysterious spell. When the lightning giant chased after her again, Alice pointed at it angrily with her little hand. Amikadon, DeRosa, Space Seal. A silver light shot out from Alice's little finger and shot into the void in front of the lightning giant. Immediately, countless silver rune chains extended from the void, instantly binding the lightning giant in a disorderly manner. At the same time, a void hole suddenly opened at the place where the silver light disappeared, and the silver rune chains dragged the lightning giant into it. Chapter 142. In the depths of the sea of fire. A cluster of flames suddenly twisted and deformed, revealing Grimm's shocked face. It had to be said that for elemental summoning magic puppets, sealing spells and expulsion spells were indeed their greatest enemies. Of course, these 2 spells could not harm the magic puppets, but they could temporarily expel them from the battlefield. With Alice's attainments in spatial magic, even if the lightning giant struggled with all its might, it would still have to stay in the completely sealed space for more than a quarter of an hour. During this period, Grimm would temporarily lose this valiant general, and would have to face the aggressive Alice himself. Ripples appeared in the air. Alice appeared in front of the huge sea of fire that was hundreds of meters wide, her face full of a sweet and lovely smile. "Big brother, where are you? Are you playing hide and seek with the cute Alice? Then you better hide well. Alice is here to find you." Her voice was sweet and seductive, but the cold light in the depths of her eyes made people shudder. Grimm's face quickly condensed from another cluster of flames, and he sneered at Alice. "You've really become capable. You've actually learned sealing spells. I'm in the fire now. Come in and catch me if you can." As soon as he finished speaking, his face disappeared, and he once again reverted to the surging waves of flames. Using his home ground advantage, he had used flame teleportation to hide on the other side of the fire. 2 wide space blades, one on the left and one on the right, slashed across the place where he had appeared previously. The flames were shattered, and the heat waves were provocative. If he had not run fast enough, he would have been injured by Alice's terrifying space slash. This was also a defensive tactic that Grimm had tailor-made for himself. After he had successfully created Body of Flame, both his elemental resistance and physical defense had been greatly improved, but it still could not change the problem of his short legs. Out of all his stats, agility had now become his biggest shortcoming, and his slow speed had also become his most fatal flaw. In order to plug his weakness, Grimm used the high-temperature force field and Body of Flame to create a huge fire field. Using the abundant fire elements gathered in the field of fire, Grimm was finally able to move quickly without any obstacles. Every now and then, he could use the elemental nodes of the high-temperature field to teleport a short distance. This also meant that if the enemy could not break through his flame field, they could only swallow their anger and chase after him from behind, enduring his endless flame attacks. Faced with Grimm's provocation, Alice's smile became even sweeter. He casually pulled out a twisting spatial rift and threw it into the fire. Then he twisted his body and dodged the terrifying giant hand formed by the flames, flashing to another place. Alice was not in a hurry. Every time she fired, she would move to another place. Every time, she would pull out a space crack that was more than half a meter long and throw it somewhere in the fire. As time passed, the interior of the fire field was gradually filled with countless inconspicuous space fissures that were slowly swimming in addition to the heat waves of the flames. These space fissures constantly devoured the flames that approached them, and anything that bumped into them would be blown away silently. They were as sharp as top-grade magic weapons. Grimm had bumped into them a few times while moving through the sea of fire. If he did not have the flame shield, he would not have been able to withstand the slashes of these space fissures with his body of flame alone. Every time Grimm touched one of the space fissures, the place he was at would be overturned by the overwhelming space fragments. That damned Alice could actually miniaturize the space fissures and throw them out like marbles. Facing such a barrage of bullets, Grimm could only use short-distance flame teleportation to dodge. However, as more and more space fissures appeared in the fire field, there were fewer and fewer nodes that he could safely teleport to. Grimm was like a lone wolf being forced into a corner by a group of hunters. The rage and brutality in his heart grew stronger and stronger. He had also thrown out the demon crocodile hunter to distract Alice. Unfortunately, the earth element demon crocodile hunter that had accompanied him during his early days had been riddled with holes by Alice's barrage of space fragments the moment it appeared. It had almost been destroyed. It had to be said that as Grimm's strength increased, the enemies he faced also became stronger. High-grade demon crocodiles like the demon crocodile hunter could only play the role of cannon fodder. They could no longer be the main characters on the battlefield. Under the torment of Alice's space fissures, the sea of fire that Grimm had created became smaller and smaller. Many areas within the sea of fire had been drained of elemental flames. Grimm was forced to reveal his body. At this critical moment, Grimm waved the Flame Lord's scepter in his hand, and a tall fire spirit appeared in the sea of fire, blocking Alice's spatial spells for him. For the first time since the start of the battle, Alice stepped into the range of the fire field. Although Alice was arrogant, she was not stupid. Before the fire field was destroyed, she would not easily step into a place that did not belong to her. But now, as the flames retreated, the area of the sea of fire had shrunk by more than half, and there were empty areas where the flames were missing. Therefore, facing the enemy who was beaten to the point where he couldn't fight back, Alice finally stepped into the outer ring of fire carefully out of the consideration of humiliating him face to face. The ground beneath her feet was scorched black, and all the grass and debris had been burnt to ashes by the terrifyingly high-temperature flames. The ashes stirred in the air along with the heat waves. The air was filled with high-temperature traps and void flames, and there was no air for people to breathe normally in the fire field. If Alice was an ordinary person, she would have long been roasted into a mummy by the high temperature, burnt to ashes by the flames, and choked to death by the filthy air. Alice was like a cute little girl strolling happily in the royal garden. She lifted the hem of her skirt and walked on her tiptoes, half a meter above the ground. It was as if there was a completely transparent path under her feet, allowing her to avoid the thick layer of grass and ashes on the ground. Just like that, Alice swayed her body like a cheerful elf as she approached Grimm, who had been forced into the center of the fire field. Grimm was finally injured. When he moved inside the fire field, he accidentally bumped into a zigzagging space crack. The flame shield that had been tortured by Alice's feet collided with the space crack and finally exploded into flame fragments. Grim could not dodge in time, and the space crack grazed his left arm. Without a sound, the flesh and blood on his arm disappeared, and even the golden arm bone inside had a huge gap. The edge of the gap was crisscrossed, as if it had been bitten by a ferocious beast. Bright red blood gushed out from the wound and quickly flowed down Grim's arm. However, the blood had flickering flames attached to it, and from afar, it looked like a small fire snake. After becoming a body of flame, even Grim's blood had become different. Mary, who was hiding 3 miles away, could not help but lick her delicate red lips. She was heartbroken by the loss of the highly concentrated flame blood. As for Grim's current dangerous situation, she turned a blind eye to it. After spending so much time together, she knew this cunning little man too well. Risking his life to take advantage of others and rather die than suffer losses, this was the true portrayal of his creed. Since he was willing to show such a masochistic attitude, he must have a powerful method to defeat his enemy. Just like Alice liked to look at her enemy's desperate struggle face to face, Grim especially liked to give his enemy the illusion that he was at the peak of his life. Next, he would use his method to directly push his enemy from the peak of his life into a bottomless abyss. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, for steps, as Alice slowly approached, the two of them finally came face to face again. 50 meters. For the two powerful quasi-sorcerers, this was already a super close distance that they could touch and smell. What? You don't want to struggle anymore. Without those elemental puppets, with your strength, how could you possibly be on par with me, the great Alice? Struggle. How? Let me tear that hateful face of yours into pieces. Ha ha! With an extremely arrogant, high-pitched laughter, Alice pulled the silver chain in her hand. Behind her, the giant fire spirit that was entangled by thousands of rune chains instantly collapsed, its entire body exploding into flames that rained down from the sky. All of this made her even more menacing and tyrannical. Grim, who had his escape route blocked by countless silver rune chains, was still smiling as he looked at the little lowly who was enjoying the pleasure of revenge. He pointed behind her. Look behind you, look behind you, look behind you. Alice raised her head and let out a satisfied laugh. What? Don't you have any other methods? You actually want to use such a boring method to steal? Before she could finish her words, a whistling wind came from behind, covering the sky and covering the earth. The aura was wild and domineering, instantly covering the area where she was. The temperature in the air rose at a terrifying speed, almost reaching 3,000 or 4,000 degrees in the blink of an eye. Countless pure white flames appeared out of nowhere in the void and burned through the space in an instant, causing the spatial structure that had always been under Alice's control to become unstable. Alice looked back in shock. A terrifying flame giant with an indomitable spirit was crouching down, stretching out a huge flaming hand to grab her. Ah! Screaming hoarsely, Alice smashed through the space in front of her and hid in the familiar endless void. Chapter 143. Alice did not manage to escape far. The reason why Grim was willing to risk getting injured to lure her into his trap was to prevent her from blinking around and fighting as a gorilla. Seriously speaking, as long as Alice put down her pride and did not care whether the situation was ugly or not, she was almost invincible among sorcerer apprentices. Even though he had a quasi-wizard like the Lightning Giant and a trump card like the Flame Lord, Grim still did not have the confidence to defeat Alice. It was just that Alice's innate spatial ability was too powerful. You used all your strength to come up with a big move. She patted her butt and ran away to watch the show from afar. By the time you relaxed a little, she would appear in front of you through a spatial rift. Even if you were much stronger than her, you would still be tortured to the point of going crazy. Since it was the debut of the newest magic puppet, the Flame Lord, Grim did not want to make the scene look like a lion chasing a fly. That was why he put in so much effort and even went to the battlefield himself. His goal was to lure Alice into the battlefield he had prepared. With the chaotic fire field and the elemental turbulence, Grimm was able to secretly bury the magic puppet crystal core in the soil and wait for Alice to come to the battlefield he had chosen. Based on his understanding of Alice's character, if there was a chance to humiliate him, this black-bellied lowly would definitely not let it go. In order to increase the power of the newest magic puppet, Grimm had also buried a few top-quality firestones and fire diamonds he had obtained from the underground volcano together with the crystal core. When Alice boldly arrived at the predetermined location, Grimm successfully summoned his trump card, the Flame Lord. Flame Lord, wizard-level elemental magic puppet. Large creature. Dual elemental attributes of earth and fire. Stats: Strength 14, Agility 8, Vitality 16, Spirit 21. Elemental spells mastered: Lava Armor, Raging Flames, Fire Core Explosion, Flaming Storm, Meteor Shower, Earth Break, Elemental Summon, Flame Teleport, Flame Cage. Apart from Earth Break, which was an earth spell, and Flame Teleport and Flame Storm, which were both fire spells, the other elemental spells were a combination of earth and fire. More importantly, this Flame Lord had mastered the elemental summon spell. Every 15 minutes, the Lord of the Flames could randomly summon 20 fire creatures from the fire elemental plane. From the quasi-wizard level giant fire spirit to the beginner apprentice level fire bat, it all depended on who would answer the summons and come through space. The spell Grimm used to deal with Alice was the only confinement spell of the Lord of the Flames, the Flame Cage. This spell used the dual attributes of earth and fire to create an enclosed space. Using this spell, the Lord of the Flames could force its opponents to engage in close combat. Alice had just broken through the space, but before she could escape far, she was forced out of the space layer by a thick pillar of lava in front of her. When she returned to the material plane, she was shocked to find that she had been imprisoned in a huge flame cage that was 30 meters long and wide. Each of the lava pillars that formed the flame cage was half a meter thick, and the gap between the pillars was huge. With her size, she could definitely squeeze through. But before she could put this thought into action, a red light burst out from the lava pillar, and a scarlet red flame that was almost white spewed out. Soon, the void between the pillars was sealed, and not even wind and rain could pass through. Any creature that got close to the lava pillars would suffer 8 points of fire damage per second. Behind her, the Lord of the Flames, which was 6 meters tall when it stood up, was running towards her with heavy steps that shook the earth and mountains. The appearance of the Lord of the Flames was similar to the summoned giant fire spirit, but it was stronger and more ferocious. Its humanoid body was completely made of physical flames, and its body was covered with a layer of lava armor that was covered with dark red patterns. Its entire body was covered in flames and flowing lava. Wherever it stood, the ground had been baked into dry land by the terrifying heat. The dark soil and sand began to soften and turn red, and then turned into a magma-like liquid. The flames outside its body were bright red, but the flames inside its body were pure white, and there was even a touch of gold in the core. The 2 palm leaf fan hands were made of solidified lava. Terrifyingly high-temperature flames and streams of flames shot out from the cracked patterns, forming a terrifying hand of raging flames. The space inside the flame cage wasn't big. The outside was the fire pillars that no one could enter, and the inside was the Lord of the Flames that was pouncing and hammering. From time to time, it would raise its hands and unleash a wide area fire core explosion or flaming storm. Such a pincer attack immediately forced Alice into a dead end. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Alice, who was constantly teleporting, ran around the cage with all her might, trying her best to find the weak point of this enclosed space. Unfortunately, the dangerous environment didn't allow her to stop and attack this weak point that was constantly flowing. Instead, the terrifying temperature and streams of flames that were everywhere had worn down the space outside her body as thin as a piece of paper. The space blades that she activated had also cut the lava pillars into pieces, and flames flew everywhere. Unfortunately, as the red light on the lava pillars flowed, all the damage was repaired in the blink of an eye. As for directly attacking the Lord of the Flames, Alice tried her best, but the results were even worse. After all, the Lord of the Flames was a true magus, and it consumed 18 points of mental force. If Grimm didn't have the body of flames, which have the consumption of fire spells, it would have been impossible for him to appear at the same time as the lightning giant. However, such a powerful magus would be able to destroy the heavens and the earth as soon as it appeared. With Alice's current strength, she could only run at the sight of it, and there was no way she could fight it head-on. If not for the flame cage, Alice could have escaped the attack range of the Lord of the Flames with a teleportation spell, and escaped without looking back. But now, what would happen if she was locked in a cage with a ferocious lion? No matter how hard Alice tried to escape, the lingering flames still burned through the space outside her body. Her clothes were set ablaze, her long hair was curled up in the flames, and her tender skin was covered in blisters one after another. There were flames everywhere. There were scorching flames everywhere. There was a terrifying temperature everywhere. Where could she escape to? Even in such a miserable situation, Alice's voice was hoarse from shouting, and her tears were flowing, but she still clenched her teeth and refused to admit defeat to the damned enemy. If she was defeated again today, she would rather die in this place that made her despair. Finally, the fire poison invaded her body, making it difficult for her to move, and the scene in front of her became blurry. Finally, under her tearful gaze, the Lord of the Flames grabbed her with its huge hand, and in an instant, her vision was covered. Without a doubt, Alice's mind relaxed, and her consciousness fell into the endless darkness. She didn't know how much time had passed, when a stream of clear and sweet water flowed into her dry and cracked mouth. Alice gradually regained consciousness. Even though she was choking and coughing, Alice still swallowed the most refreshing nectar in the world with all her might. Only when her lower abdomen swelled and she couldn't swallow anymore did she stop this crazy action. This was an ordinary and simple acolyte's residence. There was no gorgeous and comfortable bed, no luxurious furniture, and no dazzling magic crystal lamp. The only things she had were a simple wooden bed, a wooden table, a chair, and some common experimental utensils and bottles among the acolytes. In front of the bed, holding a water bag and staring at her silently, was the person she hated, Grimm. At this moment, Alice just realized that she was naked. The princess' long dress that had been burned into a mess was now a pile of garbage that was no better than ashes, and her witchcraft equipment filled the entire table. As for her, she had been stripped clean, and her body was covered with burn marks of various sizes, covered with a pungent black ointment. Originally, there was a thin blanket covering her body, but as she suddenly sat up and gulped down water, the blanket slid down, revealing her delicate and budding body. Alice was already 16 years old, but her body was permanently fixed at the moment when she awakened her spatial talent at the age of 7. There were no screams or tears. Alice stared at Grimm expressionlessly. She didn't even use the blanket to cover her body. How can you control a wizard-level elemental puppet? Her voice was empty and fleeting, like a puppet that had lost its soul. She didn't even need to verify the fact that she was defeated by this bastard in front of her, because that witchcraft contract that she had personally created had bound her to that bastard's body. She was now the property of the other party. You didn't kill me because you don't want to lose my precious combat power, right? Also, you don't want to offend those terrifying northern witches. Alice thought faintly in her heart. Her thoughts and mind were unprecedentedly clear and thorough. Looking back at what she had done during this period of time, Alice seemed to see an arrogant fool who was running further and further away on the road to death. When did she become so stupid? Damn it, I've sent myself to a dead end. From the moment she was defeated, Alice seemed to have become a completely different person. She was completely different from the crazy and black-bellied little lowly from before. From the moment she regained consciousness, Alice had started a dark road to redeem herself. Alice stared at Grimm's dark pupils with a tinge of red. She did not find any lustful expression in them. She glanced around the room from the corner of her eyes, but she didn't see the female vampire. What is this? Stripping me naked and applying medicine on me. Is he trying to soften my hatred and pull me to his side? If he really wanted me to serve him, why didn't he let Mary apply medicine on me? Wouldn't that be better for him? Chapter 144. While Alice was staring at Grimm expressionlessly, her thoughts running wild, a green-skinned goblin poked his head out from behind Grimm and looked at Alice with suspicion and vigilance. Okay, KB, this is the Alice I've been talking about. From today onwards, she's my personal maid. Your task is to teach her the necessary maid etiquette. I want to see her work as soon as possible. Okay, take her away. Like a bolt from the blue, it instantly made Alice dizzy, and she saw stars in front of her eyes. Did this bastard really want to make a prospective wizard with a rare spatial talent a maid? Alice's face, which had been trying her best to stay calm, was now flushed. She glared fiercely at her self-righteous master. What? Do you have a problem with that, Alice? The smile on Grimm's face became more and more strange. Didn't you say clearly before the duel that I'm your master? Why can't you even do the job of a maid now? You're very good. Alice squeezed out a few words from between her teeth. She angrily wrapped herself in a blanket and got off the bed. As soon as her feet touched the ground, Alice felt a great pain in her limbs and every corner of her body. This caused her to sway uncontrollably, and she almost stumbled and fell. However, Grimm did not move at all when facing a little lowly with the face of an angel. He did not even have the slightest intention to help her up. After all, Alice was a prospective wizard who walked the path of elemental magic. Her physique could not be compared to Grimm's, who had already turned his body into an elemental. Up until now, Alice's physique had not exceeded 10 points, which made her body's recovery even worse than those senior apprentices who specialized in physique. She clenched her teeth and insisted on leaving Grimm's room. KB's room was just next door. As soon as she entered KB's room, the expressions of pain, hatred, and humiliation disappeared from Alice's face. Instead, it was replaced by arrogance and dominance. Even the timid look from before had disappeared, as if the pain all over her body could not affect her at all. I need better healing potions and water of ASU that can remove scars. Also, I'm hungry. Ask them to prepare mushroom trout rolls, golden roast goose, and chevron tea. Remember, the trout must be devil trout from the dark abyss, and you can only choose the 3 tentacles at the lower jaw. Also, the honey on the surface of the golden roast goose must be snow bee honey from the East Coast. And, as the owner of the room, the gnome cabbie's mouth opened wider and wider. Towards the end, he was so angry that he jumped 3 feet high. He waved his fists and roared, "Delusional! You arrogant little human! This is the territory of the gnome master cabbie, and you're just a new servant. I came earlier than you, you must..." KB's roar did not continue, because Alice had already torn open a small spatial rift and kicked it into it. Half a quarter of an hour later, when Alice reopened the spatial crack and let Cabby out, the robe on his body had already become shredded like a beggar's, and the skin on his back was full of traces of fangs and claws wreaking havoc. On the other side of the spatial crack, the howls and howls of the pack of wolves could be heard. Seeing that all the wounds on Cabby's back were on his back, Alice immediately judged his personality. She casually smoothed out the spatial crack and said coldly, "Now you know who's the boss in this room? If that pack of saber-toothed wolves isn't enough to satisfy you, I can send you to the wyvern's nest." Although the saber-toothed wolves were only low-ranked magical beasts, and their attack power was not worth mentioning, to a gnome like Cabby who had no attack power and only had 2 or 3 disguise and escape skills, it was already a dreadful beast. If he was thrown to the wyvern's nest, which had an astonishing sense of smell, it would be difficult for him to return in one piece. The next second, Cabby knelt on the ground, hugging Alice's smooth calf as he howled, "Boss, boss, boss, you're the boss here. I'll listen to everything you say from now on." Alice kicked it in disgust and frowned. Go away. Prepare clothes, food, and healing potions for me. When I'm having my meal later, I want you to tell me the story of you and that bastard fellow. The backlash from the witchcraft contract in her soul caused Alice to pause for a moment. She had no choice but to change the way she addressed that bastard to a more neutral fellow. Otherwise, even a perspective which, like her, would not be able to avoid the piercing pain in the depths of her soul. God knows, in order to better restrain that fellow, she had purposely chosen a contract scroll with the best witchcraft effect from her great-grandmother's personal collection to use. Now, he had actually tied her up. How could this not make Alice speechless? Only by understanding the enemy better would she be able to defeat them at the lowest cost. Alice made up her mind. From now on, she would never look down on that hateful bastard. Ouch, fellow. She would patiently and meticulously understand everything about that fellow. And then, don't even think of using a rubbish contract to restrain the great. Ouch, ouch. It hurts, it really hurts. As the loser of the wager, Alice's every word and action had to bear the restrictions and restraints of a powerful contract. Once a thought of disrespecting or harming her master surfaced in her mind, her soul would suffer varying degrees of backlash from the contract. If such a backlash occurred too often, it would cause irreparable damage to the origin of her soul. At that time, her future path as a witch would come to a premature end. The mental fluctuations on the other side of the contract were inevitably affecting Grimm. It had only been less than 15 minutes since he parted with that little girl, but the strange fluctuations transmitted through the contract had already reached 17 times. However, most of them were curses and small fluctuations of disrespect. So Grimm simply handed over the execution of the contract to the AI chip, and then blocked the direct spiritual connection between the contract and himself. Based on that little girl's arrogance and stubbornness, she wouldn't stop until her head was broken and bleeding. Therefore, Grimm's instruction to the AI chip was to give all the feedback. Any disrespect would be punished through the contract, and it would not be delayed or tolerated. Just as he finished dealing with this troublesome little girl, a fragrant wind blew from behind, and a hot and soft body pressed against his back. Grimm, why don't you let me train that Alice? I'll definitely make her obedient, and I guarantee that it'll be more effective than that witchcraft contract. Mary's seductive voice rang in his ears, mixed with a soft and nasal voice. Oh, another one. Grimm almost could not help but rub his head. Mary, I'm warning you, don't even think of turning Alice into your blood slave. Grimm said solemnly, Alice's identity is still a mystery, but she definitely has some relationship with the Northern Witches. Although the blood slave you created through the embrace is extremely powerful, it's not without its flaws. As long as you, the source of the blood, are killed, your control over Alice's soul will naturally disappear. So if this Alice really has a powerful background, you're applying for a death quota for yourself. I understand. I'm not stupid enough to steal a woman from you. But, Mary excitedly licked her red lips, it shouldn't be a problem if I suck a little of her blood, right? Grimm sighed softly. Can't you see? This Alice probably just advanced to a quasi-wizard, and she couldn't wait to fight me. She hasn't even adjusted her body and spirit to the best condition yet. If you suck her blood now, she'll probably fall back to a senior acolyte in minutes. Don't mess around. We need to properly train her. Her abilities play an important role in my plan. I can't suck this, I can't suck that. How can I improve my strength like this? No, I need to find a suitable acolyte mission. It's much more free outside than here. Mary was born with a fiery temper, and she did as she said. She turned around and left Grimm's residence, heading straight for the mission hall. Grimm sighed, took out a book on witchcraft, and opened on the table to read silently. Swamp Tower, 5th floor. In a dark and gloomy, secret room, Anderson waved his hand to disperse the magic mirror in front of him, and his face showed a hesitant expression. A Magus-level elemental puppet? How did this kid do it? As far as I can remember, There has never been a case of an acolyte being able to control a magus-level puppet or a wizard beast. If someone tried to do it by force, just the summoning alone would instantly drain their spiritual force, turning them into a brain-dead idiot. But this kid did it so easily. Maybe I should find a puppet master to check if there's anything special about his summoning course. After thinking for a while, Anderson waved his hands in front of him, and the void was like a mirror, showing the scene in another secret room. This was a magic room that was almost isolated from the outside world. The floor in the middle of the room was densely engraved with strange runes and secret spell formations. There were countless strange words and symbols that twisted like tadpoles, and many of them were mysterious knowledge that had never appeared in the outside world. Even though the wizard formation was complicated and mysterious, all the runes, and wizard rings were wrapped around it, and they all pointed to 3 core nodes. There were 3 things that looked like torture chairs erected there. Judging from the overall layout, this should be a vicious spell formation that was a mixture of a magus advancement ceremony and life force absorption. The 2 torture chairs at the periphery were the energy sources that powered the entire spell formation. It seemed like they were prepared for Entich and Mary. As long as they were forcefully promoted to Magi through a special spell formation, the subsequent spell formation would squeeze out all of their life essence, which would then gather and pour into the wizard ring at the center of the spell formation. Chapter 145. Anderson had been an official sorcerer for more than 300 years. Due to his timid and cautious nature, he rarely participated in battles between sorcerers, which was why his strength had increased very slowly. In the past 100 years, his strength had almost stagnated. The family's latest planar war was about to begin. According to past statistics, the death rate of grade 1 sorcerers participating in the planar war was more than 50%. For sorcerers who were not good at fighting, the death rate would continue to increase. Hence, in order to increase his strength before the planar war, Anderson had no choice but to take the risk and put his attention on a few of his quasi-sorcerers. Originally, this spell formation was only prepared for Emtic and Mary, but with the appearance of Grimm and Alice, Anderson felt that he should modify the spell formation to include the 2 of them as well. Even if Anderson succeeded in advancing, he would definitely be punished by the Salubo family if he devoured 3 quasi-sorcerers nurtured by the family in one go. However, he would already be a grade 2 sorcerer by then. As long as he was willing to hand over more authority, the family's punishment would probably be limited. After all, between a grade 2 sorcerer and 3 quasi-sorcerers, anyone could tell who was more valuable. The Salubo family currently only had 1 grade 3 sorcerer and 1 grade 2 sorcerer. If a grade 2 sorcerer suddenly appeared, the family's strength would definitely skyrocket, and their status and benefits in the Scattered Tower Forest would also increase. Under such circumstances, who would really pursue the fault of a grade 2 sorcerer? After checking the secret magic room, Anderson patiently checked on Emtic, Mary, and Grimm's situation. He had the highest authority in the Swamp Tower, so he could inspect the inside of the tower and any scene within a 3-mile radius at any time. Moreover, it would be very difficult for the other party to detect him. Using this method, Anderson was able to grasp the current situation of the sorcerer apprentices in great detail. However, Grimm had only appeared in his sights for a short period of time, and Anderson's understanding of him was undoubtedly the least among the 3 quasi-sorcerers in the tower. Hence, for the sake of safety, Anderson felt that he should only devour Emtic and Mary. As for Grimm, after taking control of his body, he would force him to advance by force. If he succeeded, he would become one of his ingredients. If it didn't work, he would throw it to Mary to absorb. This would also increase Mary's success rate in leveling up. With the help of Mary's large amount of origin blood, Entich's chances of successfully advancing were very high. Although Mary's strength would be greatly reduced, with the nourishment of Grimm and Alice's blood, there was still a chance for her to advance. If necessary, he could even throw those mid-level and high-level acolytes to Mary and let her nourish herself. Besides, he didn't need them to level up normally. By then, they would only need to take some forbidden magic medicines to stimulate their spiritual powers and boost their spiritual powers within a short span of time. And the success rate of forcibly breaking into the next level would be over 80%. As long as he devoured their flesh before they were killed by the backlash of the spell, the path to becoming a rank 2 magus would still be bright. Suppressing his excitement, Wizard Anderson thought about every step and process of his level-up plan over and over again. He thought about all the possible changes and tried his best to make up for it. According to the information leaked by the family's Tier 2 sorcerer, Lord Herbert, the ancestors would open the planar gate in a year's time and send the family's sorcerers to the battlefield. Therefore, he only had a short half a year left. Wizard Anderson's eerie gaze swept across the three-tower quasi-wizards in different places in the water mirror. His shriveled lips couldn't help but mumble, "Grow up, my fruits. When you're about to mature, you'll have the right to become one with me." He. On the second day after the bet with Alice, Poison Lord Ender appeared in front of Grimm again. Grimm was sure that if killing him could release Alice from the witchcraft contract, then he would already be a dead man. After Ender had thoroughly checked Alice's soul, his face was so dark that it seemed like water could be squeezed out of it. Black water. Under the restriction of that damned powerful witchcraft contract, Alice had basically become Grimm's contracted slave, and she was the one being restricted. More importantly, Alice was originally a descendant of the Northern Witches, and the bloodline of the Witches of Destiny flowed in her body. Therefore, the importance of the contract was much higher than the other branches of witches. Therefore, this made things even more troublesome. In the central part of the wizard continent, witches might refer to some female witches. However, in the northern part of the continent, which was the territory of the Northern Witches, witches were those mysterious people who had inherited ancient bloodlines. Each of them had a bloodline power that was far beyond that of ordinary people, and the source of their bloodline could be traced back to the first rank 9 witch in the wizard world, Salem. As the only female rank 9 witch in the wizard world, people were more used to calling her the Witch Queen. Ever since she left the wizard world, she had left behind 13 branches of witches that were in charge of different schools. After tens of thousands of years of historical changes, quite a number of which branches had gradually died out. Now, in the Northern Witches territory, there were only 7 branches that had been passed down. As for the 6 branches that had died out, under the influence of the great will of the world, they would not completely disappear. Instead, every once in a while, some of the descendants of the witches would suddenly awaken some special power, and from there, these branches that had almost died out would continue. The reason for this was said to be a compromise between the Witch Queen Salem and the will of the wizard world. People like rank 9 witches were too powerful, and they could already cause great interference to the operation of the plane world. So in order to squeeze these burdens out of the wizard world, the will of the world had to make a compromise. From then on, all witches above rank 5 would be squeezed out of the wizard world. In return, the will of the world allowed these rank 9 witches to incorporate part of their own laws into the wizard world's operating system. Although the Witch Queen had left, she had left behind 13 world laws with her own imprint in the wizard world. In this way, with the operation of the world system, her followers would never die out. Even if other powerful witches killed all of her descendants, as long as the world laws still existed. With the passage of time, when a suitable carrier was found, the imprint that belonged to her would still light up. So in the wizard continent, the witches with the inheritance of ancient laws were the real monuments that stood tall. The Witch of Destiny that Alice belonged to had died out thousands of years ago due to some special reasons. However, in the recent hundreds of years, a large number of witches suddenly appeared all over the wizard continent with special awakened talents. So the witch leader of the Northern Witches had to send a large number of subordinates to various places to bring them back to their holy land. As for these new awakened witches, some witches saw them as new hope, while others saw them as troublemakers. Both sides argued, so the work of bringing the witches back became a little awkward. Poison Centipede belonged to the Dark Witches branch, and his branch had always been on good terms with the Witch of Destiny branch. Therefore, after discovering that Alice had awakened the Witch of Destiny bloodline, Ender took the initiative to guide her back to the wizard world. Unfortunately, before the ceremony was ready, Alice had become someone else's contract slave. If it were other witches, they might have already pinched Grimm to death. Even if Alice had to die with him, they would not allow the witch's bloodline to be tainted by outsiders. But considering the power of Alice's Witch of Destiny bloodline, Poison Centipede always felt that this might be a revelation from the power of fate, so he gave up the idea of killing Grimm. Instead, he pulled him into a secret room for a deep discussion. Ender warned Grimm that the only way to bind Alice to his side was to let her bloodline power grow as fast as possible, and then rush to the Northern Witch's territory within 10 years to complete the baptism of fate there. In this large-scale awakening, Alice was not the only one with the Witch of Destiny bloodline, and after the baptism, only one could survive. If Alice did not make it in time for the ceremony, once she was baptized as a Witch of Destiny, her own power would be pushed by the world law to become someone else's sacrifice, and Alice's existence would be erased by the world's will. Grimm felt that he was under a lot of pressure when he got involved in this senseless dispute, but considering that he still needed Alice's power to save himself, he could only sigh and accept this hot potato. However, when he vaguely asked Poison Maiden Ender if he could borrow her power to help him solve a small problem, Poison Maiden Ender actually left without saying a word. Although Poison Centipede did not believe in fate, he was still in awe of it, since Alice's successful advancement to a quasi-wizard was also related to Grimm. It meant that the power of fate had tightly bound the two of them together. Before he could distinguish whether his help was good or bad for Alice, Ender would never get involved in the natural choice of the Witch of Destiny. Grimm raised 2 middle fingers in his heart to show his great contempt for this toxic witch's explanation. If she did not want to help, she just said so. She could even play tricks in such a fresh and refined way. Grimm could not help but admire her deeply. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.